Hey guys, you are watching your anime world. How are you all? Please support to subscribe this channel for watching new interesting stories. So in this video, we will see third part, what if Deku never met All Might and stayed quirkless. Here is short summary. In this alternate universe of Boku no Hero Academia, Midoriya Izuku never received One for All Might never met Midoriya Izuku. In a world where quirks are everything, Izuku grows up as one of the few quirkless people, facing the cruelty and indifference of a society obsessed with power. As UA's most promising heroes prepare to take over as the symbol of peace, All Might, Midoriya Izuku struggles to find his way in this society while protecting the only thing he has left. But before we start, if you want more stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe and like this video. And if possible, share this video with your friends. Now let's start the story. I blinked slowly, feeling the softness of a pillow and body on a bed. As clarity began to fill my mind, I realized I was in the UA's infirmary. My attention focused on the sensations running through my body. There was no pain, only a slight tiredness that reminded me of the recent battle. Recovery Girl's figure appeared before me, a veteran nurse with her usual worried expression mixed with a relieved smile. You woke up much earlier than I expected, young Midoriya. If you're wondering, I've healed your wounds with my quirk, though I did have to bandage your arms, due to all your... Yes, thanks, I nodded slowly, feeling a little disoriented as I tried to process what had happened. Where are my things? I asked, my voice still sounding a little hoarse. Are you talking about your support articles? She replied, they're on the table. Your gauntlets are all scrapped, so you won't be able to use them anymore. The rest is fine. She paused before adding, one question, kid, are those items created by Melissa Shield? Ah, yes, I replied, somewhat surprised by the mention of her name. I knew it. The veteran nurse crossed her arms and sighed deeply. That kid's always giving me headaches ever since her first year at UA. She shook her head as if remembering old stories. She's a brilliant inventor, don't get me wrong, but she just can't seem to stop her inventions from ending up in a high-risk situation. Her tone was a mix of respect and exasperation. She'd clearly had some past experiences with her. I see, I muttered, trying to digest her words while keeping my eyes on the ceiling, trying to keep my mind clear. Are you still tired, kid? Recovery Girl asked, watching me carefully, because if you need more time to rest, your match can wait. Combat. The word slipped from my lips before I could stop it, and I immediately remembered who I was about to face. A chill ran down my spine at the thought of Bakugo. Memories of the past began to haunt my mind, like ghosts that refused to go away. Every blow I received, every taunt filled with contempt, the faces of my classmates laughing cruelly. Bakugo had always been there, like an uncontrollable storm, always ready to crush me. I saw myself, small and defenseless, facing a boy who believed himself invincible. Every word of his, every Deku, had left scars deeper than any physical wound. In the past, no matter how strong I tried to make myself, it was always like I was fighting a mountain I couldn't climb. Bakugo, I muttered, clenching the sheets of the bed. My body, although healed, still felt the weight of all those confrontations. My thoughts drift to my mother, her face tired and stressed after my father left, leaving a shadow of sadness in our home. She had endured so much, struggling to keep me afloat in a world where being quirkless was a curse. Guilt choked me, knowing that her suffering was partly tied to my own struggle to be accepted. Frustration and anger welled up inside me, threatening to darken my resolve. How many times had I cried silently, wishing I had the power to fight back? In those moments, insecurity and torment turned into a fervent rage, an unquenchable fire that began to consume everything I had ever believed about myself. The echo of my classmates' mocking laughter continued to reverberate through my mind, dragging me back to that dark place of isolation and pain. The feeling of being an outcast, of having been quirkless and rejected, fueled a grudge that had been buried deep within me. Every blow, every insult I had endured over the years now burned within me, stoking a rage that spread, threatening to consume everything in its path. The hope that used to guide me seemed to fade away, drowned by the flames of frustration. Brother, Aries' voice broke through my dark thoughts, her light and joyful tone cutting through the darkness like a ray of sunshine in a storm. She ran into the room, her childlike energy lighting up every corner. Her bright smile was a beacon that chased away the shadow of rage that was beginning to take over me. When her small hands gently touched my legs, I felt the contact bring unexpected peace to my heart. The warmth of her skin was like a balm that began to heal my inner wounds. The anger and resentment that had threatened to overflow just a moment ago began to fade under the light of her presence. Her big, bright eyes, filled with admiration and unconditional love, reminded me why I was fighting. Eri was more than a little girl, she was the reason I kept going, the spark of hope I had been searching for amidst all my pain. "Izuku," she exclaimed, her childish voice brimming with excitement, "I was so worried about you. I couldn't wait to see you awake." Her joy was contagious. Even though the weight of what was to come still hung over me like a dark cloud, her presence made everything more bearable. She reminded me that there was something beyond the struggle, something worth protecting. "I'm happy to see you too, Eri," I replied with a smile, feeling my chest lighten for the first time in what seemed like hours. "Are you okay?" "Yes, I'm fine," she replied with an even wider smile. "I've been watching your fights, I wish I was as strong as you." Her innocence and desire to be strong with me warmed my heart. The anger that had begun to build up inside me was slowly dissipating, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. She looked at me with those eyes so full of hope, and I couldn't afford to let her down. At that moment, an imposing figure appeared in the doorway, filling the entrance with his presence. "All Might, this little young lady couldn't wait any longer, so I brought her here," he commented, his voice deep and comforting. "She was very excited to see you after your fight. She's a big fan of her older brother." "Thank you, All Might," I muttered, trying to make my gratitude sound sincere, though I couldn't help but feel a small hint of distrust towards him. He had always been my idol, but doubts about whether his words of encouragement would be enough for what was to come plagued me. Was I really ready to face Bakugo again? But at that moment, with Eri by my side, what mattered most to me was that she was here, with me, offering me some much-needed calm. As I continued to hold Eri's gaze, I felt the darkness that had begun to take hold of me fade away completely. It was then that I noticed something in the corner of the room. There was another bed occupied, and for a moment, I thought it was Todoroki lying there. My concern instantly grew. Todoroki wasn't someone I had formed a close bond with, but after our fight, I felt responsible for any injuries I had caused him. "Is Todoroki okay?" I asked, a slight pang of guilt crossing my chest. The battle we had had was still fresh in my mind, and the weight of my actions continued to haunt me. "Yes," Recovery Girl replied from across the room, in her usual calm tone. "Todoroki recovered quickly and left. You have nothing to worry about, boy." And although I felt relieved by that news, but at the same time, confusion began to grow inside me. "So, who is it?" I asked, pointing at the figure on the bed. Curiosity and uneasiness began to mix, uneasy at the thought of someone else suffering. "What happened to him?" I asked, looking at the figure on the bed with growing concern. Recovery Girl sighed, her expression revealing a hint of sadness. "She is Uraraka Ochako," she replied. "She had a tough battle against that blonde student. She ended up badly injured, but I was able to heal her quickly. My quirk depends on the energy of the person I'm treating, so that helped. Still, keep resting. Don't worry, it'll be fine." I nodded again, but this time the relief was replaced by a growing sense of unease. Uraraka had been hurt in a way that I had trouble processing. I didn't know her at all, we had barely spoken at the festival, we weren't friends either, but thinking of her, someone so kind and optimistic, in a situation of pain and vulnerability, made me feel a growing sense of concern. "Did Bakugo do that to her?" I asked quietly, though the answer was already obvious. I knew Bakugo's explosive temper all too well, his ferocious nature, and the way that when he charged into a fight, he rarely stopped to think about collateral damage, or whether his opponent had given up, always attacking them mercilessly. I had seen his intensity countless times, how he attacked with relentless brutality. Recovery Girl sighed deeply, noticing my agitation. "I'm not sure of all the details," she replied, her voice calm but full of wisdom. "The battles at the sports festival are always intense. The important thing is that Uraraka is here, safe, and her body is healing. Like I said, my quirk will help her fully recover. Still, guilt ate away at me. I couldn't help but feel responsible in some way. There was no way I could intervene. Uraraka was someone I had come to trust, even if it was only for a few brief moments that we worked as a team, and seeing her hurt, it hit me in a way I hadn't expected. I looked at the figure on the bed, her breathing soft but steady, her face peaceful despite what she had endured. Uraraka wasn't weak, I knew that, but right now she seemed fragile, vulnerable in a way that made me uncomfortable. The image of her in my mind, bright, determined, always ready to help, clashed with the reality of seeing her hurt by the brutality of a bloody, violence-worshipping idiot. I felt helpless in the face of the injustice of her suffering, an echo of the rage that had begun to build up inside me. Eri looked at me, her face full of worry. "Brother, are you okay?" she asked, her voice shaky, like a whisper that intertwined with the uneasiness that was washing over me. "Yes, I'm fine." I tried to smile, but the mask of confidence I had built up was beginning to crumble. "I have to go to my fight now, Eri. Please take care of yourself." "Brother." That was the last thing I heard from her before I grabbed my things from the table and headed for the infirmary door. Her voice echoed in my mind, a sweet melody that reminded me of what I was fighting for. Every step I took towards the combat arena was fraught with emotion. Despite the anguish I had felt at seeing Uraraka in that state, there was a part of me that insisted that I shouldn't care what had happened to her. "No, it doesn't matter," I muttered to myself, trying to drown the guilt that was starting to build up in my chest. She was just a girl who I had saved from being crushed by a robot in the test, who had thanked me for that and for my advices, even though she shouldn't have. She had trusted me to be part of her team and win, but right now, that didn't count. "This is not about her," I repeated to myself, trying to dissolve the guilt. Uraraka had been strong, she had fought bravely in her own battle. The image of her determined face flashed through my mind, and a part of me felt ashamed of considering her only a victim. I didn't care to see her lying there, hurt by that same aggressive and violent guy who screams at everything in front of him. "No, it's definitely not because of that," I thought, trying to convince myself. The words slipped through my mind, like a mantra trying to hide the truth that I knew was there. What did it matter? What did it matter? What did it matter? I'm going to tear it to pieces. What did it matter? What did it matter? What did it matter? At the stadium, Present Mike was at his best, his electrifying voice resonating throughout the venue as he captivated the audience with his endless energy. This is the moment we've all been waiting for. The grand finale. UA's top students will face off in a battle that will determine who will be this year's champions at the Grand Sports Festival. With a dramatic move, Present Mike raised his microphone, his voice reverberating like thunder in the air. "Let it not be said that we were not here to make history." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, a tide of enthusiasm and energy filling every corner of the stadium. Spectators waved banners, shouting the names of their favorite heroes with fervor. The atmosphere was electric, like a lightning bolt about to strike, and the tension grew as the moment of truth approached. We have competitors who will let nothing stand in their way to glory. On one side, we have the fearsome Bakugo Katsuki, with his incredible explosive power that leaves everyone breathless. The mention of Bakugo elicited a deafening roar from the vast majority of those present, some even clapping and shouting his name as if he were an idol. His fame, fierce determination, and indomitable spirit had made him a true titan on the UA stage. And on the other side of the ring, we have the incredible Midoriya Izuku, the boy who has proven time and time again that determination and hard work can overcome any obstacle. Present Mike raised his voice even higher, letting each word fall like a bolt of pure energy. Midoriya has been an unstoppable force in this festival, and there's no doubt that he's here to fight until the end. There was also applause for Midoriya, although he didn't seem to hear it, and the way Bakugo looked at him, full of disdain and defiance, only made some feel a little sorry for him. The cameras of all the media were focused on both competitors, capturing every emotion and every flash of determination that shone in their eyes. The tension in the air was palpable, every whisper from the crowd echoing like a murmur of expectation. "Are you ready, people?" Present Mike shouted, his voice reverberating through the stadium like a bolt of pure energy. The audience erupted into a deafening roar, a mix of cheers and screams that filled every corner of the venue. The excitement was contagious, and everyone in the audience rose from their seats, raising their arms in support. Both competitors were preparing. Bakugo, his gaze intense and defiant with a sadistic smile, adjusted his hands, preparing to unleash his explosive power. The determination on his face was clear. He wasn't there just to win, he was there to prove that he was the best, and to crush this stupid nerd. On the other hand, Midoriya stood firm, his breathing controlled, reflecting a calm serenity that contrasted with the ferocity of his opponent. However, in the stands, someone noticed a change in him, and it was none other than his sister, Eri, who was attentively watching her brother's every move. Eri frowned, her wide, expressive eyes filled with worry. "Why are you acting so different?" She thought to herself. It was as if there was a gap between the Izuku she knew and the one fighting in the ring, who, despite his unwavering determination and gaze, there was something about his posture and gaze that made her uneasy. It's like he's someone completely different. As the paths between Bakugo and Midoriya intensified, Eri couldn't help but feel overwhelmed by the tension. "Izuku, please don't be him," she said to herself, her heart pounding. "And now, without further ado, let the grand final battle begin," Present Mike exclaimed, raising his microphone in a dramatic gesture. The crowd erupted in deafening cheers and applause, as the sound of the whistle echoed throughout the stadium, marking the start of the long-awaited showdown. Bakugo didn't act immediately, his smile a mix of arrogance and rage. "Finally, we're here, Deku. I've been waiting for this moment, the perfect moment to show you where you belong. Just a worthless Quirkless. Today you're going to understand that once and for all." His voice boomed like thunder, each word designed to unsettle his opponent. He analyzed his opponent, and saw that he didn't have any of his support items. His gauntlets were destroyed from that silly battle he had against Half-Half. He didn't have his ugly boots either. Now he only had some ugly red sneakers. Those things he wore on his wrists weren't there either. He only had that stupid belt with, surely, junk that wasn't worth worrying about. The most obvious sign of his weakness was the bandages on his arms, a clear reminder of how close he came to breaking completely in their previous confrontation. He didn't have a chance. "What's wrong, Deku?" Bakugo let out a mocking laugh, his eyes full of superiority. "Aren't you going to use that nosy blonde's toys?" He was referring, of course, to Melissa and her support equipment, the tools that Midoriya had once used to fight off opponents who could easily outclass him. But Midoriya remained silent. There was no need to respond. His lips were sealed in a calm line, while his intense gaze was fixed on Bakugo. The nerves of other fights were not there. There was no room for doubt, nor for hesitation, nor for words. This time, only what mattered was what he was going to do. From the stands, spectators watched with great anticipation, convinced that this was just another stage in the famous rivalry between a member of Class 1A. "Look at how they prepare, this is incredible. This is the true rivalry of heroes, isn't it?" commented one of the fans, encouraged by the excitement of the moment. "Yes, they have both worked hard to get here. It is great to see how they face each other in the ring," said another voice, his optimistic tone reflecting the belief that this was just a friendly competition between friends. "I'm sure they'll shake hands and laugh about it all in the end." But in the arena, the atmosphere was completely different. Midoriya and Bakugo did not exchange smiles, nor light words. The gazes on both of them were fierce, filled with deep emotions that none of those present could fully understand. Despite the laughter and optimistic comments from the stands, both knew that this went far beyond a simple sparring match. For Bakugo, this wasn't a friendly rivalry. It was a battle to reassert his superiority, to prove once again that he had always been the true hero. This wasn't about a fun competition, at the end, or shared laughter. This was about crushing any doubts about who was number one. And for Midoriya, this wasn't just a physical battle, but a fight against his past, against the years of fear, insecurity, and that constant feeling that he would never be enough. It wasn't just Bakugo he was facing. It was his own weakness, his old self that still whispered inside him. Each one carried his own weight in that fight, far beyond what the public or even his teammates could see. The atmosphere was charged with tension. While the crowd kept up their cheers, few realized that the fight unfolding in the ring was much more opposite than they could have imagined. Bakugo continued his taunts, relishing every moment the attention was on his opponent. "Come on, Deku, attack me. I'm eager to see what you've got. Do you have any tricks up your sleeve, or are you just going to stand there, making a fool of yourself?" His voice echoed with contempt, each word designed to wear down Midoriya's will, as if the mere act of remaining silent was an insult to his own greatness. But Midoriya remained coldly silent, rock solid. His gaze was intense and piercing, fixed on Bakugo, challenging the arrogance that was pouring out of him. "You have nothing to say, Deku. This is pathetic. People expect me to crush you, and you just stand there like an idiot," Bakugo accused, his frustration growing with each passing second without a response from his opponent. The tension between them became palpable, like a rope stretched to the brink of breaking. Every insult Bakugo threw was a desperate attempt to provoke Midoriya, to drag him into the emotional fight he himself had turned into a battlefield. Yet, despite the provocations, Midoriya did not budge. He did not let his enemy's words destabilize him. Even though Bakugo began to get frustrated, he felt satisfied with the feeling of superiority he felt, with thoughts that gave him that satisfaction. "You are a weirdo, and none of this will save you. Today is the day you finally understand your place, Deku. You are doomed to be the loser, and I am the winner." The certainty of his victory filled him with adrenaline, and the image of Midoriya being defeated was projected clearly in his mind. "This is just a game to me, and I am about to win. I will always beat you." Midoriya remained completely silent, his cold, calculating gaze fixed on Bakugo. There was not a hint of emotion on his face, as if he was watching a storm from the safety of a shelter. This disregard for provocation was beginning to irritate Bakugo, and frustration bubbled up inside him like an eruption about to explode. "Why aren't you saying anything? This isn't fun." This lack of response destabilized the dynamics of the confrontation, turning what should have been a duel of rivalry into a game of patience. Bakugo felt the energy of the fight fading away, and that made him even angrier. Every second that passed without Midoriya responding increased his anger, and his desire for the fight to finally begin became an intense burning. In the back of his mind, Bakugo kept telling himself that his opponent's silence was a sign of weakness, an acknowledgement of his own superiority. But as that thought settled in, so did the uneasy feeling that there was something more to Midoriya's calm, something he couldn't ignore. That tranquility seemed like a serene ocean, but Bakugo knew that beneath the surface, the currents could be treacherous. From the stands, spectators watched the stage in excitement, their murmurs filling the air with anticipation. "This is amazing. Look at how Bakugo is unleashing his energy. This is going to be a great show," said one, his voice filled with enthusiasm. Another joined the conversation, a tone of concern creeping into his comment. "Yeah, but what about the other one? Why isn't he responding? This doesn't feel right." The murmurs grew, and confusion began to overshadow the initial fervor. Eri, in those stands, remained on the edge of her seat, her eyes fixed on her brother. There was a palpable concern in her expression, a fear that sprang from her protective instinct. "What's wrong with you, brother Izuku?" Her heart was pounding, recognizing that look in him, that silent intensity that could turn dangerous. "Why are you acting like that?" she thought, as a knot of anxiety formed in her stomach. Bakugo, for his part, couldn't take it anymore. Every second of Midoriya's impenetrable calm was like a needle stabbing into his pride. "This idiot still doesn't move." His patience had reached its limit, and with a furious shout, he broke the silence. The roar of his voice echoed throughout the stadium, shaking the crowd. "Die!" Bakugo exclaimed, raising his palm towards Midoriya, intending to end this one-sided confrontation. The battle had already begun. Without hesitation, he began to concentrate his power in his hand, preparing an explosion. The heat of his quirk began to vibrate in the air around him, while sparks of light swirled in his palm, ready to be released. The crowd erupted in cheers, anticipating the first attack. Everyone was expecting a show of power, not realizing the gravity of the moment. Only Eri, at that moment, felt the anguish consuming her the most. "Watch out." However, Midoriya, with speed that almost defied the eyesight of onlookers, dodged the blast with surprising agility. It was as if he had read Bakugo's movements before they happened, moving with surgical precision at the last second. The explosion echoed, but he was no longer there. What the hell, was the only thing that crossed Bakugo's mind the moment Midoriya's foot hit his ribs with a force he didn't expect. The blow launched him several meters backwards, forcing him to roll on the ground before stopping with a grunt of pain. He's fast, he thought, trying to process what had just happened. It's like he's someone completely different. Confusion mixed with rage in his chest. Bakugo stood up quickly, brushing the dust off his clothes, the burning in his side fueling his frustration. The crowd roared, surprised by Midoriya's swiftness, and shouts of excitement reverberated through the air. "Come on, you can do it," was the cry of some, while others simply stared in disbelief. Bakugo, feeling his pride had been hurt, clenched his fists, sweat beginning to trickle down his forehead, breathing heavily and with a mix of confusion and rage in his gaze. He quickly stood up, rubbing his sore ribs. What the hell did he do? He asked himself, while trying to find a logical explanation for Midoriya's speed and precision, as if he was telling him that he was no longer the same idiot he always used to know. And then, he spoke. Too predictable. Midoriya's voice was cold, emotionless, like a sentence. His eyes, now completely focused on Bakugo, showed no trace of doubt or compassion. He was a relentless warrior. Bakugo tried to compose himself, but those words hit him harder than the kick. The crowd was momentarily shocked. "Loser." Midoriya said this with chilling calm, a word he had heard so many times from Bakugo's lips. But now, spoken by him, it resonated with much greater weight. The pain in Bakugo's ribs burned, but that wasn't what consumed him. It wasn't the physical blow that truly hurt. It was those words. Midoriya's voice, normally filled with insecurity or fear, had now transformed into something sharp, cutting, almost inhuman. But Bakugo wouldn't accept it, wouldn't let a simple blow make him doubt himself. How dare he say he was better than him? How dare those stupid teachers declare this Quirkless, as the representative of everyone present? And then give that absurd speech about being better heroes. Ridiculous. Pride struggled to prevail over pain and reality. It was as if those words were a poison he was trying to shake off. No one, absolutely no one at this festival had managed to touch him like that. Not dumb face, with his electricity, not crap hair, with his punches, not even round cheeks, with his anti-gravity ability. They had all fallen before his unstoppable explosive power. This idiot is nothing, he repeated in his mind, clinging to that idea with a rage born of years of contempt. Midoriya Izuku is just trash, a useless, a Deku. The thought made him even angrier. How could someone like Midoriya, someone he had despised his entire life, dare raise a hand against him, much less hit him? Memories of his childhood flooded back into his mind, memories he usually kept buried. His parents, with their kind smiles, always telling him to be gentler with that boy. They told him that Midoriya was his friend, that he had to take care of him. But he didn't see it that way. To Bakugo, Midoriya was always a shadow, a weak figure who followed him everywhere, admiring him in a pathetic way. And now, that boy stood before him, with a strength he had never shown before, a strength he couldn't ignore. How had he changed so much? The quirkless nerd he had always considered inferior was standing, watching from above, after having beaten him in front of everyone. But Bakugo wouldn't let that blow mean anything. The heat of his explosions began to surround him again, as his gaze grew even fiercer. Midoriya's words echoed in his mind, but he refused to let them affect him. The air around him crackled, his rage manifesting in the sparks that began to surround his hands. This was it. He wouldn't let Midoriya get a win over him. He wouldn't let him win. Not after all these years of Bakugo proving time and time again that he was superior. With a roar of pure fury, Bakugo lunged again. "Die!" he shouted, his voice shattering the silence of the stadium. A burst of light and heat erupted from his two palms, creating a shockwave that rumbled through the air. The spectators leaned forward, sensing the impending explosion. But Midoriya was prepared. Without hesitation, he nimbly slid beneath Bakugo's body, dodging the blast with astonishing precision. The shockwave crashed into the ground, kicking up a cloud of dust and debris, but Midoriya was no longer there. Bakugo, still in the air, could barely process what had happened. The ground where Midoriya should have been was now a smoking crater, but the nerd had disappeared. How is he moving so fast? He thought, as he tried to regain control in the air. The crowd looked on in shock, unable to believe their eyes. Midoriya had avoided Bakugo's attack with a grace that no one expected. His younger sister, Eri, watching from the stands, felt a mix of relief and fear, but Midoriya's transformation in the ring filled her with concern. Bakugo landed hard, the impact echoing beneath his feet as he frantically searched for Midoriya through the growing cloud of dust. His heart was pounding furiously. He could not, under any circumstances, let that damn nerd get the better of him any longer. Just then, he heard a cracking sound near him, as if something had broken a few meters away. Turning quickly, his gaze met with a thick cloud of white smoke surrounding him. What is this? He thought, while his instincts went into high alert. The fog was thicker than usual, covering the ground around him and limiting his vision. No, he couldn't afford to lose sight of Midoriya, not after being beaten and humiliated. Frustration boiled inside him, as the palms of his hands began to gather energy. Bakugo knew he had to do something before it was too late. But that strange cloud puzzled him. Was this another trick of Midoriya's? No matter what you try, damn Deku, he thought, gritting his teeth, I'm going to crush you. Without a second thought, Bakugo leapt into the cloud of smoke, trusting his instincts. Midoriya's footsteps echoed in his mind as he moved cautiously, concentrating on any sound that might give away his location. His heart was pounding, a rush of adrenaline propelling him forward. Finally, breaking through the thick white veil, he emerged from the mist and there stood Midoriya, in front of him, arms crossed. A ridiculous sight, his posture was that of someone who was completely sure of himself, as if he was enjoying the show. Did he really think he would fall into such an obvious trap? Was all Bakugo could think, overflowing with contempt. Idiot. Without giving up, Bakugo charged his quirk in his hands, heat building up in his palms as he prepared to unleash a devastating explosion. This was his moment. He couldn't let Midoriya see him falter, not after everything that had happened. You won't get away this time. Fury burned within him, and in an instant, he launched an attack that promised to be the most destructive of all. Nothing. What? Bakugo screamed, stunned. The explosion he had expected never materialized. There was only a small, insignificant detonation. In his hands, energy burned, but his quirk didn't respond. The surprise hit him like a hammer. An icy cold ran down his spine and his heart stopped dead for a moment. What is going on? He looked down at his hands and saw that they were covered in white powder. But it wasn't just his hands. His clothes, his hair, his entire body was completely covered. Before he could process what was happening, Midoriya appeared out of nowhere. A fast, fierce, straight punch landed on Bakugo's face, so sudden that he barely had time to react. The impact was devastating. Blood poured from his nose as his body flew backwards, crashing to the ground and rolling to a stop in a cloud of white dust. The crowd erupted in screams and cheers, shocked by the brutality of the counterattack. No one, not even Bakugo's most fervent fans, expected such a clean, powerful strike. The stadium, which seconds before had been in turmoil, fell silent for a moment as the crowd processed what had just happened. What just happened? One of the students from Class 1B shouted, his eyes wide with astonishment. I can't believe it. Midoriya landed a direct hit on Bakugo, another student exclaimed, unable to look away from the arena. What is that white powder? Is this some kind of strategy? That was amazing. Another muttered, unable to understand how someone like Midoriya had managed to put someone like Bakugo on the ropes. In the broadcast booth, Present Mike was silent for a few seconds, stunned by what he had just witnessed. Then, as if activated by a spring, he came back to life. Amazing. People, Midoriya is taking the initiative with a direct hit on Bakugo. Did anyone else see that? What the hell just happened? He shouted, his voice filled with disbelief and excitement. The crowd began to react to his words, cheering even louder. Meanwhile, in the teacher's box, Aizawa watched the scene with his typical unfazed calm. His narrowed eyes followed every movement of the students on the field. That's what happens when you underestimate your opponent. He muttered to himself. He had seen this kind of growth before, but what he was seeing in Midoriya was a new level. Even if he seems like a Quirkless, Midoriya has learned to use his surroundings and his opponent's weaknesses to his advantage. Bakugo didn't see that coming. He commented quietly to Midnight, who was equally surprised. Meanwhile, in the arena, Bakugo was slowly getting up. His body was shaking, not only from the pain of the blow, but from the mix of rage and humiliation that consumed him. His eyes, full of fury, burned like embers. Midoriya, that damn nerd, had dared to hit him in the face and, even more insulting, to throw him to the ground. He wiped the blood from his nose with the back of his hand, breathing unevenly. He gritted his teeth, his hands shaking, not from fear, but from pure anger. Damn nerd, he screamed with all the rage that flooded through him, his eyes fixed on Midoriya, who stood there, calm as a still ocean. With his arms at his sides, he waited for the next move. There was no arrogance on his face, only a cold, calculating determination. That calmness was driving him crazy. The crowd erupted in cheers and screams, adrenaline coursing through their bodies as the fight intensified, eagerly awaiting the next clash between Bakugo and Midoriya. Bakugo, furious and frustrated, raised his hands once more, determined to unleash an explosion big enough to wipe out Midoriya's serenity. But as he tried to channel his power, only a tiny explosion emerged, almost ridiculous compared to his usual potential. His eyes widened, disbelief and pent-up rage filling him. He stared at his hands, still covered in that damned white powder, unable to understand why his quirk was failing. What? Bakugo muttered, his frantic mind searching for answers. That white dust covering his body, his clothes, his hair, something was weakening him, something was interfering with his ability. Midoriya, on the other side of the field, maintained his position, watching him without moving, with a calm that drove him crazy. That calm and controlled attitude was what infuriated him the most. Tell me what the hell have you done, damn Deku? Bakugo roared, launching himself at him again, regardless of what was happening. His attacks were less precise, more impulsive, blinded by anger. You can't beat me. But his attacks were easy to dodge. The entire stadium was enveloped in a sea of murmurs and questions. Why are Bakugo's explosions so small? A freshman asked, his face reflecting bewilderment. Something's weird. Midoriya must be doing something right, added another, pointing to the white dust floating around him. From the broadcast booth, Present Mike tried to keep the excitement in his voice, although the confusion was evident. People, this is getting intense. Bakugo Katsuki seems to be having trouble with his explosions. Does anyone know what's happening? Midoriya Izuku seems to be controlling the situation with impeccable strategy. Aizawa, from the teacher's cabin, watched everything intently, his gaze serious and analytical. He had noticed something about the way Midoriya was handling the fight. The dust, he muttered, eyes narrowing. It must be blocking the sweat glands in Bakugo's palms. It was a simple, yet brilliant tactic, neutralizing Bakugo's explosive power without needing to confront him directly. He's using his surroundings and Bakugo's weaknesses to his advantage. Smart of him, he said quietly, impressed by Midoriya's calmness and precision. Bakugo began to attack with unbridled fury, throwing punches and kicks with deadly precision. Despite his rage, he was not careless. He had always sought to excel in everything he did, and that included hand-to-hand combat. He had trained tirelessly in kickboxing, perfecting each move until his punches became weapons as dangerous as his explosions. Every punch he threw was measured, precise, and powerful. But Midoriya was no slouch. He blocked every punch, every kick, and counterattacked with equal skill. Despite Bakugo's fury, Midoriya remained calm, dodging and returning every attack with a serenity that only infuriated him further. How can this nerd keep up with me on this? Bakugo thought as his fist was blocked by Midoriya's forearm. Confused, he couldn't understand how the boy he had considered inferior all his life was now fighting him in hand-to-hand combat, without the help of any quirk or gadget. The blows echoed through the stadium, a fight that did not seem like one from a festival of heroes, but rather a full-blown street battle. It was wild, raw, and the two fighters did not stop. Punches, kicks, blocks, counterattacks. It was a furious exchange of techniques, where technique and strategy were as important as brute force. Bakugo launched a high kick with his left leg, aimed at Midoriya's head. Midoriya quickly blocked it with his arm and counterattacked with a hook aimed at Bakugo's abdomen, but Bakugo dodged by spinning around and trying to launch a low kick towards Midoriya's legs. Midoriya, in an agile movement, jumped back, narrowly avoiding the blow. Damn Deku, Bakugo thought, frowning with an intensity that threatened to explode. Not only was he defending himself, but to his horror, he was matching his speed and strength. The audience watched, silent, stunned at the spectacle unfolding before their eyes. They had come to witness a display of quirks, but what they were seeing was a fight that looked like it was taken from the streets. The murmurs in the audience began to grow. This isn't just a quirk fight anymore. They're fighting like professional wrestlers, exclaimed a student. Midoriya is fighting fearlessly, against Bakugo, added another, impressed by the bravery of the boy he had always seen, once, as the weakest. From the broadcast booth, present Mike couldn't help but get excited. It's an all-out fight, people. Midoriya and Bakugo are taking this battle to another level. This isn't just about showing off quirks anymore. Aizawa, watching from his seat, kept his gaze fixed on the two of them. You've both evolved, he said quietly, but the true test will be how long you can maintain this intensity. While most spectators believed this was simply a friendly fight between two of UA's top students, few realized there was something darker and more personal going on in this battle. Despite superficial comments about the prowess and strength of both combatants, few grasped the deep resentment fueling Bakugo's rage. Die, Deku. Those words weren't part of a simple competition. The contempt Bakugo felt towards Midoriya, calling him with that degrading nickname, was evident. It wasn't just a casual nickname, but a constant reminder of the past, of the humiliation he had inflicted for years, seeing him as useless, a quirkless with no future. While most of the audience was thrilled with the intensity of the fight, there were those who understood the true nature of the fight. All Might, watching from the stands, felt each blow as an emotional burden that went beyond the competition. This fight is not just for the festival, he thought with a mix of worry and sadness. It's a battle for years of contempt and unresolved feelings. He knew what was at stake because he had watched him grow up, had watched the relationship between Bakugo and Midoriya transform since childhood. But now, it was something he could only observe from a distance. He knew there was a much deeper clash at the heart of it all, one that the cameras and the audience couldn't pick up on. Beside him, little Eri watched the fight with eyes filled with anguish and terror. Her small hands clung tightly to All Might's arm, as if she feared that, at any moment, something terrible could happen. No. Please, no. She whispered softly, so softly that it was barely audible. Eri didn't fully understand what was happening, but she could feel the tension, the latent hatred in the air. To her, this wasn't just a fight, she saw pain and fury intertwined. All Might looked at her and felt a pang of pain. Eri, he thought, unable to look away from her anguished expression. He knew she could sense the darkest emotions in the fight, much more than the excitement of the crowd surrounding them. Midoriya, to Eri, was a hero, a symbol of hope and goodness, and seeing her like this, consumed by worry, only made All Might wish more than ever for this confrontation to end before it got out of hand. Damned it! Bakugo roared, furious, unable to understand why he couldn't manage to hurt this nerd. His frustration grew with every second. He couldn't prove that he was the best, he couldn't finish him off, he couldn't make him understand his place. His outbursts were meaningless, and anger consumed him as he watched Midoriya hold his own, even outmatching him. He threw a punch straight at Midoriya's face, who, with determination, absorbed the impact. In an instant, he spun on his heels and counterattacked with a powerful punch that connected with Bakugo's jaw. The force of the impact shook Bakugo's head, but his fiery spirit refused to give up. I will not fall. To someone like him, repeated itself over and over in his mind, clinging to the ground with all his might. With a roar of defiance, he held his stance, defying the pressure of impending defeat. Both fighters, propelled by the force of their attacks, were catapulted backwards, landing with a crash at the other end of the stage. The echo of their falls resonated through the crowd, but soon silence fell over the arena, as spectators held their breath, waiting to see who would rise first. Bakugo quickly stood up, his determination overcoming the pain he felt on his face. To him, the burning on his skin was a mere reminder that he was fighting, and that sensation was insignificant compared to the fury consuming him. "I'm not going to let a useless like you beat me," he said to himself, clenching his fists tightly, his gaze fixed on the opponent before him. But what about Midoriya Izuku? The young hero lay on the ground, panting, his body exhausted after the impact. Despite the pain and fatigue, something inside him forced him to get up. With his gaze fixed on the ground, his trembling hands clung to the combat arena, while his furious opponent, Bakugo, launched himself towards him with uncontrollable rage. Along with his cry of hatred, it was like a thunder that announced his intention to destroy him. "I'm going to kill you, Deku," Bakugo roared, his words filled with a fury that seemed to surpass the mere desire for victory. He wanted to destroy him, crush him, erase him from the world. And the crowd, they cheered him on. As if they wanted to see Izuku fall, defeated and humiliated. As if his defeat was a natural expectation, something that was bound to happen. That's when something finally snapped inside him. This was the harsh truth he had always tried to ignore. Midoriya Izuku was always invisible to the world. He could have died out there on the streets and no one would have noticed. It wasn't that he was really invisible. No, the truth was even more bitter. It was that the world simply did not want to see him. No one wanted to pay attention to a Quirkless, an anomaly, a mistake of the world and the very gods who had created it. Why would they bother looking at someone like him? Someone who had been labeled a burden from the moment he was born. No one felt empathy for his pain. Everyone brushed him aside, ignoring his tears, his struggles, his desperation to fit into a world that had never given him a chance. What did him suffering matter? What did it matter what had happened to him when the heroes didn't help his mother, when they scolded him for trying to save her and called him stupid? What did it matter that his heart was broken over and over again, when everyone else did nothing but look down on him? None of that mattered, but there came a time when the invisible boy could not bear it any longer. There came a time when the weight of all those years of pain and rejection became unbearable. And he called for the monster. Ah! The scream that emerged from his throat was not human. It was the scream of something primal, deep and visceral. It was the roar of a beast that had been wounded again and again, a creature that had finally been freed from its chains. His eyes, normally bright with hope and determination, were now cold and empty, consumed by an ancient fury. There was no hero in him anymore. There was no trace of the young who wanted to save everyone with a smile. What was left was a monster. An unleashed force that no longer cared about rules, about kindness, about the world. The entire stadium fell silent, overwhelmed by the terror emanating from the monster. Even Bakugo, who had known Deku since childhood, faltered for a moment. This was not the guy he had always despised. This was something much darker, much more dangerous. The monster that had been kept inside for so long, had finally come out. Die. His body moved on pure instinct, guided by years of resentment, pain, and a pent-up rage that now consumed him. Bakugo, always so sure of his superiority, didn't understand what was happening. It was as if every blow the monster threw was a discharge of pure hatred, an unstoppable force that he didn't know how to counter. Bakugo threw a punch with everything he had, but the monster didn't even flinch. The blow landed on its body, but it only fueled the flame burning inside it. That intense rage extinguished any other feelings, any other emotions that might have existed in the monster. Bam! The monster's fist slammed into Bakugo's jaw, shaking his reality. The force of the impact was so devastating that Bakugo's body stumbled, losing his balance. But before he could fall, the monster grabbed him by the shoulders with superhuman strength and delivered a brutal knee to his stomach. Bakugo, gasping for air, spat out saliva, his body screaming in pain, but he had no time to recover. Because the monster hit him with a headbutt so hard that it broke his nose. The monster then crouched down, striking Bakugo's legs with surgical precision. His opponent, who until then had been invincible in the eyes of many, finally fell to the ground. And when Bakugo hit the ground, something inside the monster broke too. Everything I had repressed for years, all the pain of always being pointed out as the mistake, as someone invisible and unwanted, was unleashed like an unstoppable force. There was no more restraint, no more limits. The monster was not going to stop. The monster was not going to show any mercy. With eyes bloodshot with rage, the monster lunged at Bakugo, intent on finishing him off. This was no longer a classmate, not even an opponent. He was a demon, a living tormentor that had fueled the fury that now burned within the monster's soul. And now, that demon had to be destroyed. Ah! The monster roared, his eyes bloodshot with rage and his body soaked in adrenaline. The stadium, which had been filled with cheers and applause just minutes before, had fallen into absolute silence. No one could believe what they were witnessing. What had started as a simple fight at the festival had exploded into a display of pure fury and despair. The spectators, who had previously been celebrating the confrontation, were now paralyzed, unable to look away from the terrifying spectacle in front of them. Even Bakugo, who had never known fear, now felt it deep within him. His eyes reflected an emotion he had never shown before, fear. For the first time in his life, he realized that this was not the Midoriya he had always despised and humiliated. This was something much darker, more dangerous, a beast out of control. Neither the heroes nor the referees moved. Midnight and Smentos were frozen, unable to react. This was no longer a simple contest. It was a catharsis, an explosion of repressed hatred that had been brewing for years. The spectators, who had previously been enjoying the spectacle, were now petrified, watching in horror and confusion. Were they witnessing the birth of a villain or the ultimate downfall of a future hero? The atmosphere had become thick, as if despair could be felt in the air. Who was he really? Was he that boy full of dreams and hope, or had this unleashed beast emerged, forged by years of pain and suffering? Who was this monster? Even the monster didn't know it. His mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, a chaos that seemed to have no end. Inside him, a being he had never wanted to be had been released. Was it possible that he had become everything he had once feared? But before the monster's fist could finish off the demon in front of him, a familiar voice pierced through the heavy atmosphere like lightning. "Brother!" The scream echoed in his mind, a word loaded with meaning that cut like a blade through the veil of fury that enveloped him. The monster didn't understand why he could hear it so clearly. Why was that voice stopping him? "Brother!" she insisted, a voice coming from the crowd, cutting through the hatred that consumed him, sliding between rage and chaos. The monster recognized her. There was something in that sound that was familiar, something that pierced the wall of anger that blinded him. The monster remembers her. It was that girl, that small, fragile girl, the same one the monster had saved from those demons that were chasing her. A spark of memory shone through the darkness that blinded the monster. The monster remembers her name, Eri. The monster looked up, searching for the source of that voice. And there she was, standing, looking at him from the stands, like a beacon of light in the middle of a dark sea. She was surrounded by people, but for the monster they did not exist. There was only her, the girl that the monster had saved. But why was she the only one looking at him, not with fear, but with sadness? Her big eyes, normally bright and full of innocence, were now clouded with a deep sadness accompanied by tears, a silent plea. It was as if she was telling him something, as if through her gaze she was desperately begging him to stop. "Don't do it," was what her eyes seemed to say. The girl's plea pierced the layers of fury that enveloped him, like an anchor that sank deep into his being, holding him to something stronger than rage. The monster stopped. The fist, which until a second ago was ready to crush his enemy, began to tremble. The fury, which had burned inside him like an uncontrollable fire, began to falter. But even so, the echo of his scream kept repeating itself in his mind, colliding with the memory of all the insults, all the looks of contempt, all the blows that the monster had endured during his life. All that accumulated pain, mixed with the echo of his rage, fought to maintain control. But there was that little girl, reminding him that there was more than anger in his life, that there was still something worth saving. Why was that little girl so worried about the monster? Why was she crying for the monster? The silence was deafening. The entire stadium had fallen silent, the gazes of the spectators fixed on him, unable to look away from the scene unfolding before their eyes. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The air was thick and tense, everyone waiting for the outcome, as if a single sound could trigger an inevitable tragedy. Time seemed to stop, but there he was, a monster trapped between the past and the present, his fist raised in the air, ready to fall like the hammer of an unforgiving judge, his breathing erratic, heavy, and his heart pounding furiously, each beat a drum in the midst of absolute silence. With each beat of his heart, the monster felt a reminder of everything he had lost in his life. His mother, his dreams, his identity, his hope, his humanity, everything was crumbling in front of the monster, piece by piece. And now, the monster was about to lose the only thing he had left, that little girl. The first person who hadn't seen him as a monster. The only one who had seen beyond that fury and despair, who had seen what the monster once was. And now, he was losing her too. For a moment, everything around him began to fade. The screams of the crowd died down, the bloodied face of that demon on the ground blurred, even the image of that little girl, standing in the stands, begging for help, became distant, as if he were seeing her through a fog. All that remained was anger, a spark that consumed him from within, mocking his weakness, his failed attempts to control what he could not. In that sea of confusion, rage and pain, the monster began to remember. Memories that the monster shared with that girl flooded his mind. Why are you giving me this? That time, the girl had given him a drawing, a badly made scribble, with colors outside the lines and letters that were barely understandable. But the message, although clumsy, was clear. Hero. The monster didn't understand. Hero. Him. A monster who could barely contain all that anger, who fought his own demons at every turn, who only brought darkness in his wake. Why do you call me that? The monster had asked, confused, his voice cracking with doubt. However, that little girl had looked at him with those big, sincere eyes, and had responded with the innocence characteristic of a child, accompanied by a big smile. Because you are my hero, Izuku. Those words echoed in his mind as everything inside the monster roared, calling for destruction, demanding revenge for all the suffering it had endured. But that small voice, that little girl's voice, was a spark of light in the midst of the darkness. That drawing, that little gesture, that simple word, hero. That girl had given hope to the monster, at his lowest point. That girl had reminded the monster of who he wanted to be, who he should be. Eri. Finally, Midoriya Izuku felt a flash of lucidity break through the storm that consumed him. Eri didn't see him as the monster full of anger and resentment. Eri saw him as a hero, even when he couldn't see himself that way. The anger, which had been his only companion in that moment, began to recede. Midoriya's fist came down with one last stifled cry in his throat, as if that simple gesture had cost him every shred of will he had left. His muscles, tense and rigid, trembled under the pressure of containing the unleashed fury that had been on the verge of consuming him. His breathing was labored, and his body, exhausted from the intense internal battle, gave the impression that it could collapse at any moment. But he didn't, he simply took a step back, moving away from the chaos that he himself had almost unleashed. The entire stadium fell still, enveloped in a deafening silence. The roar of the crowd, the cries of the heroes, everything had died away. The very air seemed to be holding its breath, as if it feared what might happen if the monster rose again. The spectators, still in shock, did not know if they were witnessing the end of a catastrophe or the prelude to something even worse. The pro-heroes watching exchanged worried glances. They had seen this young man standing on the edge of the abyss, dangerously on the verge of a fall that could have destroyed him. In the distance, Eri, who had called him brother, with a mix of love and despair, let out a sigh of relief that her voice had reached him, that the Izuku she knew had returned. But the air around her was still heavy, laden with the aftermath of the fury she had barely managed to contain. On the ground, Bakugo, in pain and with his face marked by the blows, tried to understand what had just happened. His body was in pain, but the real damage was not in his physical wounds. He had felt fear, a primal, visceral fear that he would never have imagined feeling when facing Deku, the same quirkless boy he had ridiculed for years. Seeing that Midoriya, transformed into an unstoppable force, was like a slap in the face to everything he believed himself to be. But what hurt him the most wasn't the beating he'd received. It was the expression on Midoriya's face when he looked at him after everything. There was no trace of hatred in his eyes, no anger, no revenge, just pity. Pity, as if Bakugo was no longer a threat, as if he wasn't worth the effort of his anger. That look tore him apart inside. It was worse than any physical injury. It was like a mirror showing him a truth he wasn't ready to face, that Midoriya was no longer within his reach. And maybe it never had been. An old memory, buried deep in his mind, suddenly rose up. He remembered that time, as children, when Bakugo had fallen into the river, caught by his own arrogance, he became careless and fell. He remembered his desperation, his fear, and how, in that moment of vulnerability, Deku had reached out to him, with the same worried expression that plagued him now. "Are you okay?" Deku had asked him that back then, not caring that he didn't have a quirk. Bakugo Katsuki despised Midoriya Izuku from that moment on. Having to worry about him, offering him help, was the worst. It was as if she was telling him that he was weak, because he was always going to be the best no matter what. But, now, Midoriya didn't approach him, didn't extend a hand, didn't offer words of comfort or inquire after his well-being. Instead, he turned his back on him. Without even looking back at him, Midoriya began to walk, his steps firm but tired, away from the combat arena, the crowd, and Bakugo. Every step he took hit him like a hammer in the chest. Midoriya was moving away. That image, of the quirkless boy who had always been his shadow, his target of mockery and scorn, was now moving away from him, not in defeat, but in something worse, in indifference. And with each step, Bakugo felt smaller, more insignificant. No, Bakugo thought, anger boiling inside him again, it can't end like this. He can't leave me behind. His body shook, more from rage than pain, as he managed to get to his feet. "Where are you going, Deku?" He screamed, his voice echoing in the arena. "Come back and fight, you damn coward." It was the voice of a child who didn't understand how he had lost control of everything, a cry of desperation, a last attempt to hold on to something he had already lost. Midoriya, however, was unfazed. He continued walking, as if Bakugo's words didn't affect him in the slightest. However, before crossing the threshold of the arena, he stopped, without turning around. His voice, low but firm, resonated with a coldness that froze Bakugo's blood. "You're not worth it." Those words fell like a hammer blow to Bakugo's heart. They weren't insults or screams of rage, but something much worse, a sentence. A declaration that, in Midoriya's eyes, he was no longer worthy of his attention, his anger, his hatred, of anything. Midoriya continued on his way, leaving Bakugo alone in the middle of the arena, his pride broken and his rage burning like a smoldering fire. For the first time in his life, he didn't know what to do. The stadium was plunged into a deathly silence. The students, the pro-heroes, the commentators, no one dared to say a word. They all watched, bewildered, not understanding why Midoriya was walking away. What was happening? Why did he suddenly seem like he was giving up? Midoriya's every step echoed in the empty arena, his next words filled with a truth that no one dared to speak. "Listen well, Katsuki, because these are the words you've needed to hear for a long time." His voice, devoid of hesitation, exuded an unexpected authority. "You're just a loudmouth with an ego as big as your quirk. You'll never be the best. Your accomplishments are worthless because your motivation is rotten." Bakugo tried to process what he was hearing. Midoriya's words felt like direct blows, more painful than any physical attack. He wanted to move, he wanted to react, but his body was paralyzed by disbelief and rage. "What the hell are you saying? Do you think you're better than me? You're Quirkless. You have no right to lecture me." Pride was the only thing keeping him standing, but Midoriya's words were beginning to erode those defenses. "And this society of heroes that you praise so much," Midoriya continued, not stopping his advance, "that same corrupt and false society, that idolizes powerful quirks like yours, and that casts aside those who do not comply with its demands, will fall one day." He paused, turning his head just enough to give Bakugo a look that pierced his soul. "And when that happens, you will fall with it." Those words were like a dagger in Bakugo's heart. Everything he had fought for, everything he had believed in, was crumbling before him. His pride, His identity as the best was being crushed at that very moment, not by a power struggle, but by the raw truth of someone he had always looked down on. His mind desperately searched for an answer, some verbal counterattack that would restore his dignity, but Midoriya's words rang too loudly. There was no room for escape. As Bakugo struggled with that truth, Midoriya continued to walk towards the edge of the arena, firm in his decision to lose by disqualification. He didn't want to win the festival. His only goal was already accomplished. He had promoted Melissa Shield's inventions, ensuring that his younger sister would have a better future. This festival no longer had any importance for him. With each step towards the edge of the arena, Midoriya felt the weight of his own decisions grow more unbearable. Bitterness clung to him like a shadow. He had lost control of his emotions, he had let his inner darkness consume him, frightening even his own sister. And worst of all, he had allowed those resentments, those he had suppressed for so long, to rise to the surface. He had lost, but not against Bakugo, not against this society, not against the world. He had lost against himself, and that was what hurt him the most. Bakugo, however, couldn't accept what was happening before his eyes. Defeat, as it was presented at that moment, was unacceptable. To him, Midoriya wasn't just giving up the fight, he was challenging his very essence, his very reason for being. Bakugo, driven by rage and despair, screamed at the top of his lungs. "Don't you dare turn your back on me, Deku." But Midoriya didn't stop. It wasn't an escape, and Bakugo knew it deep down. It was the final statement, the death blow to his pride, because there was nothing Bakugo could do to change the outcome. And he couldn't accept this. The fire of his pride continued to burn, fueled by rage that Katsuki Bakugo couldn't control. He couldn't allow the one he had despised all his life, that damn Deku, to leave him there, wounded not only in body, but also in soul. "I'm not pathetic. You're the useless one, you're the damn Deku," he screamed, his voice cracked with a fury that hid a more painful truth, fear. Fear of being insignificant, of being surpassed by someone he had always considered inferior. The explosion he was preparing in his hands would be much more devastating than before. "If I destroy it, if I crush it now, everything will go back to the way it was before," he thought as the sweat on his palms sizzled with explosive energy. Bakugo launched himself with all the anger and frustration he felt at that moment. "Die, Deku!" His scream echoed through the stadium, filled with a desperation no one had ever seen in Bakugo before. The crowd was stunned. Not even the heroes present reacted in time. Midnight and Smentos tried to intervene, but it was too late. The concrete walls Smentos had put up were shattered by Bakugo's explosion, sending debris flying everywhere. However, Katsuki's attack never reached Izuku. At the last second, a towering figure stepped between the blast and its target. The greatest hero, the symbol of peace, stood between them and took the blast. The arena shook from the impact, but All Might didn't even flinch. His presence dominated the scene. Bakugo stood frozen, his body shaking not only from the adrenaline, but from the overwhelming impact of the reality that had just exploded in front of him. The explosions of fury he had unleashed seconds before now seemed insignificant compared to the emptiness he felt inside. Why had All Might, the symbol of peace, the hero he admired most, decided to protect a damn Quirkless, someone he had always considered a failure, a useless piece of trash? Questions piled up in his mind, but he couldn't find an answer to any of them. This time, All Might wasn't wearing his signature smile. There wasn't even a hint of the warm, bright joy he usually showed to the public. His face, so familiarly encouraging, was hardened by a deep, almost palpable disappointment. His eyes, normally filled with determination and hope, now reflected something Bakugo would never have imagined seeing in the number one hero, sorrow. A sorrow so great that it froze his blood. Then, All Might's words cut through the air, sharper than any explosion. Each syllable echoed with crushing weight. Is this how the top student of the hero course reacts to defeat? All Might's voice, deep and full of disapproval, fell like a sentence. Each word was like a knife, stabbing deep into Bakugo's heart. That pride, that arrogance he had built up over the years, crumbled with a single look from his idol, shameful. The coldness in that word, spoken with an indifference that hurt more than the contempt itself, was the most devastating blow Bakugo had ever received in his life. Everything he had believed himself to be, all the pride he had nurtured, was crumbling before his eyes. The hero he admired the most, his beacon of hope, now looked at him with disappointment. There was no anger in All Might's voice, not even open reproach, only cold condemnation, as if he were not worth wasting emotions on. Bakugo felt as if the entire world was crumbling beneath his feet. All Might, with the unwavering serenity that always characterized him, brushed the ashes off his suit with a calm gesture, but his face reflected a solemn seriousness that chilled the atmosphere. He slowly turned to Izuku, who remained on guard, his eyes reflecting the confusion and exhaustion of battle. Despite the adrenaline still throbbing in the air, Izuku did not let his guard down, aware of the seriousness of everything that had happened. The stadium was deathly silent. Everyone present, from the students to the pro heroes, held their breath. The tension was palpable, as if the air itself was charged with electricity. And then, All Might broke the silence with a sentence that echoed like thunder in Bakugo's mind. Even without a quirk, this young has proven himself to be more honorable and a better hero than you. Those words hit Bakugo with the force of 1,000 explosions. It wasn't just a statement, it was a devastating truth that tore him apart from the inside. The emotional impact was so brutal that Bakugo could barely breathe. It was as if every fiber of his being was being crushed by the weight of that undeniable truth. The one he had despised for so long, the boy he considered weak and pathetic, had been acknowledged as superior by the man he revered. Bakugo's pride, his greatest weapon and shield, was now suffocating him. In that instant, Katsuki understood that the deepest scars were not physical, but those forged by words that shattered the essence of who he believed himself to be. All Might's words echoed in his mind like relentless hammer blows, dismantling piece by piece the facade of arrogance he had built for so long. All Might's stern look was the final blow. Bakugo, always strong and invincible, now felt more vulnerable than ever. A mix of shame, pain and humiliation consumed him, making his legs tremble. The same pride that had always kept him standing abandoned him at that crucial moment, leaving him defenseless against the crushing truth his hero had revealed to him. And then, unable to bear it any longer, Bakugo fell to the ground, unconscious. The impact of his body resonated throughout the arena, an echo that symbolized the fall of his will. Within seconds, pro heroes and medical staff rushed to his side, moving urgently. All Might, for his part, remained unfazed, although his expression reflected a solemn sadness. With a firm voice, he ordered that Bakugo be taken to the infirmary. However, his gaze soon turned to Midoriya, who was still petrified, immersed in the whirlwind of emotions that had been unleashed. Izuku couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. His mind struggled to process everything that had happened in those frantic minutes. And now, seeing All Might approaching only heightened his alertness. He was prepared for anything, but not for what came next. All Might, the symbol of peace, who moments before had shown unusual toughness, sketched his usual bright smile, the one that always inspired confidence and calm. With an unexpected softness in his voice, he said, "Relax, young Midoriya. Everything is fine." All Might's words cut through Izuku's disbelief, and slowly, the knot of tension in his shoulders eased. Though still dazed, he began to relax. He slowly lowered his arms, and a sense of relief washed over him upon hearing those words. All Might, with a gesture full of pride, raised this young man's arm to the sky and proclaimed loudly, "Everyone, meet the winner of this great sports festival, Midoriya Izuku." The silence was broken in an instant. The entire stadium erupted in cheers, screams, and applause. The crowd, which had witnessed a battle of emotions and powers, now celebrated the young man who, against all odds, had risen up. The students looked at him with admiration, the professional heroes watched him with respect, and the audience cheered his name as if he were the hero of the moment. But Izuku wasn't smiling. Amidst the applause and congratulations, he only felt an emptiness in his chest. He had won, yes, but he didn't feel like a winner. He had let out a part of himself that needed to come out, a dark and vengeful part that filled him with bitterness. He felt more defeated than ever, not because of Bakugo, but because of his own actions. The pain in his heart was stronger than any physical wound. So, looking for answers, looking to confess, he approached All Might, the hero he had come to admire more than any other in his childhood. "Are you sure, Mr. All Might? I didn't behave properly. I'm not a hero. I'm really nothing." His words came out in whispers, as if each syllable carried the weight of his despair. All Might looked at him with that mix of compassion and wisdom that only he knew how to show. "I don't know your past, young man, which must have been hard. But that doesn't define you at all. What really matters is who you choose to be. And you chose to stop when you were about to fall." He paused, letting those words sink in. "And besides, you are already a hero. Maybe not to everyone here, but to someone very special, you are." Izuku looked at him, confused. "Why do you say I'm a hero?" "Because after all, you were that to that little girl over there." All Might looked towards the stands. Following his gaze, Midoriya Izuku saw Midoriya Eri, his younger sister, with tears in her eyes. But they weren't tears of fear or sadness, but of joy. She was happy to see him, to know that he was okay, that he was back to being the person she knew. He was no longer the scary boy who had fallen into darkness, but the kind Izuku who had offered her calm and light in her darkest moments. The hero who saved her from the villains. Then, a flash of genuine happiness lit up Midoriya's face. He offered Eri a big smile, one that was neither forced nor empty. A genuine smile, full of love and gratitude. At that moment, despite everything, he realized that there was something worth protecting, someone who needed him. The connection between them was palpable, and with every beat of his heart, Midoriya felt that even though he had faced darkness, there would always be light if he chose to move forward, not as a hero, but as the brother that Eri needed. Midoriya Izuku was a hero not because he had some amazing power, but because he would never stop fighting for those who needed help. A well-deserved moment of tranquility in his life. The atmosphere at the HPSC headquarters, once the nerve center of hero politics, was now a pressure cooker. The air, thick with tension, was unbreathable. The monitors on the walls showed the image of Midoriya Izuku, being proclaimed the winner of the sports festival by none other than the symbol of peace, the country's greatest hero, All Might, his figure illuminated and surrounded by applause. The echo of the crowd celebrating their victory resonated like a mockery in the ears of the higher-ups. An awkward silence reigned in the room, broken only by a sudden thud against the table. A burly man, the veins in his neck bulging with rage, had slammed his fist into it with such force that the scattered folders and documents shook. His face was flushed, and his eyes, filled with a mixture of disbelief and fury, stared fixedly at the screen. "This is unacceptable," he growled, his voice echoing so loudly that it seemed like the walls were vibrating. "A quirkless brat has won the festival. What message are we sending to the public?" The defeat of Bakugo Katsuki, one of the best in the hero course offered by UA Academy, was already bitter enough, but seeing Midoriya Izuku, a nobody who was part of the support department, who was not diagnosed as quirkless, being hailed as the emerging hero, was a mortal blow to the system. All of the HPSC's effort to maintain the narrative that only the most powerful, those born with extraordinary quirks, deserved to be heroes, was shaken. This festival was our opportunity to reaffirm that the true heroes are those who are born with power, those who represent the elite, the man continued, as the other officials nodded silently, their faces rigid. "But instead, we have a quirkless. Someone who until recently was nothing." The words hung heavy in the air. The resentment towards Midoriya wasn't just for his victory, but for what it represented. The idea that someone not born with a quirk could surpass those who had a quirk was an existential threat to the system the HPSC had upheld for years. The meritocracy they promoted was based on the idea that quirks defined a hero's worth. And now, that narrative was crumbling. "How are we going to explain this to people?" a woman asked from the back of the room, her voice high and tense. "We've spent years controlling public perception, building a system that revolves around the gifts. And now, this boy. Those vagabonds will see him as the symbol of a new age." The echo of his words resounded throughout the room, but what really chilled the blood of those present was not just Midoriya's victory, but what would come next. Although the situation was already bad, an even bigger problem loomed on the horizon. "That's not the worst," someone murmured from the corner of the room, their voice barely audible. but loud enough to capture everyone's attention. Because of Bakugo Katsuki's performance and what All Might said, social media has gone wild. Those self-proclaimed online detectives are going to start asking questions, investigating. The silence that followed was almost suffocating. Those incompetents from Aldera. The person continued, now with a darker tone, filled with a mix of frustration and fear. It's only a matter of time before someone finds out that that school covered up what Bakugo Katsuki did, and how they hid his incidents so that his record would look clean and he could apply to UA. The faces of those present paled at that revelation. They knew that the public narrative, carefully crafted by the Commission and the institutions over the years, was hanging by a thread. Now, with the popularity of social media and the public's obsession with investigating and exposing the truth, it would not be long before uncomfortable questions arose. It's a time bomb, a man from the front row exclaimed, his face showing a mix of despair and fury. If the citizens find out that Ua accepted a boy who terrorized his class, how are we supposed to justify considering him a hero in training? The faces of those present paled. They knew how quickly information could move on the networks. In a matter of hours, the entire system could collapse under the scrutiny of the public. Social media was dangerous terrain, especially when ordinary people, without restraint, began asking uncomfortable questions. And the connections between Aldera, Bakugo Katsuki, and his admission to Ua were about to come to light. Fear of the inevitable spread among officials. We can't let this leak out, another person intervened, his voice firm but full of tension. We have to get ahead of it. If people find out that we covered up Bakugo's abuse, the morons will start asking more questions, and they ask more questions, someone might find out more, and if that happens, it will attract the attention of the World Hero Association, or the UN. The atmosphere in the room became stifling. The words, World Heroes Association, and, hung heavily in the air, like an impending doom. The faces of the HPSC's top brass reflected the gravity of the situation. They knew that if the truth came out, they faced not only public disgrace, but a total collapse of the system they had built. Their careers, their reputations, and everything they stood for was in jeopardy. If this reaches the ears of the UN or the World Heroes Association, we will have no room for maneuver, someone said in a lower but firm tone, each word dripping with gravity. They're going to launch a thorough investigation, and when they do, it's not just individuals like Bakugo that will be dragged in, but also all of the covert operations, everything we've done to keep the system intact, Endeavor, Hawks, Lady Nagant. It will all come to light. Silence fell like a granite slab. The faces in the room, usually calm and calculating, now showed concern, even fear. They knew what this meant. Not just the collapse of reputations, but also the disintegration of the system that had sustained Japanese society and, by extension, the world. The normally cold and calculating HPSC president couldn't contain her exasperation. We can't allow this, she shouted, slamming a clenched fist on the table. The sound echoed through the room, shattering the silence like shattering glass. If this gets out, it will be the end of all the heroes we've raised, those we've protected, molded. The people will lose faith in the entire hero system. Another council member, frowning, spoke up. If they lose faith in the system, they will lose faith in the heroes themselves. Everything we have worked for, all the strategies, the covert operations, will fall apart. The public will soon be questioning everything. Who are the heroes really? Are they as pure as they say? If they begin to investigate, they will discover that many of them have been shaped by our manipulations. The impact of those words resonated like a hammer blow in the minds of those present. The idea that the trust in heroes, that pillar on which Japanese society was based, was collapsing was terrifying. But what was most worrying was not only the fall of heroes as symbols of justice, but what it would mean for the stability of the country. And if people start to distrust heroes, another voice chimed in from the back, grave and somber, they will also distrust the government. Everything could degenerate into chaos. Japan will lose its place as a beacon of stability. And when that happens, heroes will no longer be seen as ideals, but as pawns on a political chessboard. A murmur ran through the room as the HPSC members processed the magnitude of the problem. Not only was the reputation of the heroes at stake, but the people's trust in the very structure on which the country was governed. Our economy depends on heroes, another voice added, higher-pitched but equally full of concern. If their image collapses, not only will we lose public support, but all the products that depend on them, all that money generated by the hero brand, will be lost. The entire industry, from entertainment to consumer products, is built on their image. If people stop seeing them as ideals, we will be plunged into bankruptcy. The atmosphere became even more oppressive. They knew that Japan's economy had been largely built on heroes. Advertising campaigns, franchises, licensed products, everything depended on the shining image of heroes. If that image was tarnished, the downfall would be devastating. And with that, the country would be exposed, vulnerable not only to internal distrust, but also to foreign threats, and boy did the country have its share of enemies outside of the country. If we lose that stability, the voice continued, we will lose our pride as a respectable country. We will be exposed to foreign interventions. The economy will plummet, and we will be unable to cope with international pressures. Other countries will take advantage of our weakness. The HPSC president rubbed her temples, clearly trying to keep her composure as the possible consequences piled up in her mind. We can't let everything we've built come crashing down because of a single incident. We have to get rid of that quirkless brat. The abrupt comment struck the room like a bolt of lightning, but no one was surprised. They already knew where the president's thoughts were heading. However, what followed was much more complicated than it seemed. But what can we do? A man in a dark suit intervened, his voice tinged with frustration. We can't just eliminate him. He's gained quite a reputation, especially in UA. The entire country saw him at the sports festival, it was broadcast on every channel. Also, that brat Melissa Shield, David Shield's daughter, seems to be a close friend of his for providing him with that technology he used at the festival. If we do anything to that kid, there will be more trouble. The words hung in the air, filled with a weight that everyone felt. David Shield, one of the most prestigious scientists in the world, had a direct connection to the symbol of peace, All Might. And his daughter, Melissa Shield, a promising young woman seen by many as All Might's natural successor, was not someone to be messed with. If one of them were to investigate and discover that the Hero Public Safety Commission (HPSC) was behind any incident involving Midoriya, they would not hesitate to cause a scandal of international proportions to erupt. If we dare to touch Midoriya, Shield will not sit idly by, one of those present continued, visibly nervous, rubbing his neck in an anxious gesture. They wouldn't just call All Might, but heroes from all over the world. And when that happens, it will be the end of us. The image of the HPSC would collapse, and everything we've built, everything we've kept in order, would collapse. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. They knew they had a ticking time bomb on their hands, one that could explode at any moment. Midoriya Izuku not only posed a threat because of his growing fame, but because of the powerful connections behind him. His ties to renowned heroes, both national and international, complicated any possible action against him. So, what do you propose? The HPSC president broke the silence, her voice cold and calculating, but with palpable tension. Her face, hardened with worry, showed no signs of giving in to the uncertainty. We can't just leave him alone. His very existence is a problem. A quirkless boy who manages to surpass the most trained heroes, what message do you think that sends to society? That anyone can be a hero. It would completely dismantle the narrative we've worked so hard to build. Maybe. A hesitant voice rose from one of the darker corners of the room, as if the speaker was hesitating whether or not to intervene. Perhaps we don't need to physically eliminate him. If we discredit him, if we make him look like a threat, an enemy, the public might turn against him. Something that makes him a pariah, a fallen hero. The silence that followed was icy, but not from discomfort. It was as if a new possibility had begun to take shape in the minds of everyone present, a way out that would not involve the immediate scandal of a young hero's death, but rather his total destruction from within. The HPSC president tilted her head slightly, intrigued. A fallen hero. She murmured, as if savoring the words, "Explain yourself." The man in the corner continued with more confidence, watching as his proposal began to resonate in the room. Take his battle against Bakugo Katsuki for example. During that confrontation, we saw how Midoriya lost control, how he acted like an unbridled beast. If he had continued in that manner, it would have been our perfect opportunity to discredit him and eventually eliminate him. If we managed to replicate or find that scenario again, with the public's attention, we could manipulate him into looking like a threat. Murmurs intensified among the HPSC members. The president leaned forward, interested in the details. What do we know about Midoriya Izuku? She asked, her tone sharp, as if she was ready to pick apart every detail. Let's see. The man looked through a digital file on his tablet, speaking out loud as he read, not much really. Dead mother, absent father, Quirkless, dropped out of high school when he was 12 years old. Yet somehow, he managed to get into UA, and this was after catching the attention of several pro-heroes, including All Might. The president narrowed her eyes, her fingers drumming on the table. That sounds very suspicious. A Quirkless brat disappearing for 3 years, then suddenly resurfacing at UA, the most prestigious hero academy. This gives us something to work with. Another council member, a tall man with a firm stance, intervened in a calm but dangerous voice. It's possible that Midoriya has some very well-kept secret, one that we could use against him. Something that forced him to disappear and that could explain his sudden prowess, intelligence, and combat ability. If we find what he's hiding, we could destroy him without raising suspicion. The president leaned back in her chair, brow furrowed as she considered the thought. A secret, you say? Like something so dark that if it came to light, it could cause everyone who supports him to abandon him, or even make him a threat in the public perception. A cold smile formed on her lips. If we find out what he's hiding, we could use it to tarnish his reputation and those of his supporters irreversibly. The man with the firm stance nodded, his gaze calculating. We don't need to eliminate him physically, we just need to destroy his image. People will start to question how a Quirkless reached the level of the top heroes. We just need to plant the doubt. How did a Quirkless brat come to attract so much attention? Midoriya Izuku, the president said, his name in a tone of almost contempt. That kid has more value than he deserves. If we can expose him as a fraud, the public will turn against him. And if he is presented as a threat, not even All Might or the Shields, not even that damn rat Nezu, will be able to save him. The room was filled with a tense silence as everyone present took in the plan. They knew it wouldn't be easy, but they were willing to do whatever it took to keep their power intact. Good, the president finally said. Let's get to work on it. I want reports on Midoriya, his past, his connections, and any weaknesses we can exploit. If we find anything, not only will we have neutralized Midoriya, but we will have protected the structure of heroes we've built over decades. The council nodded silently, ready to dismantle Midoriya, piece by piece, until nothing remained of the legend that was beginning to take shape. And finally, the long-awaited medal ceremony begins. The stadium erupted into a sea of deafening applause as the anthem blared from the loudspeakers, filling every corner of the venue with vibrant energy. Flags waved proudly in the stands, while participating students lined up in front of the central podium, their gazes fixed on the winners, immersed in a solemn and triumphant atmosphere. At the center of the stage, the winners of the UA tournament waited nervously as the cameras focused on their faces, capturing every expression. Smentos, using his quirk, elegantly created the podiums, placing Todoroki Shoto in second place and Uraraka Ochako in third, while finally placing Midoriya Izuku in first place. The crowd erupted in cheers at the sight of the winners, though Bakugo Katsuki's absence hung in the air like a lingering echo, no one asking for him. With the atmosphere charged with excitement, Midnight stepped onto the stage, ready to continue with the proceedings. With her signature infectious energy, she beamed at the audience and exclaimed, "We can finally conclude this ceremony. And for this very special moment, we have a person who represents the true heroic spirit. The symbol of peace, All Might." The crowd erupted in cheers as All Might made his grand entrance, his imposing figure and radiant smile lighting up the stage. But this time, he wasn't alone. At his side walked a little girl, holding the shining medals that were to be awarded. She wore a hat to protect herself from the sun, her face beaming and full of enthusiasm despite the heat. Her presence, so innocent and cheerful, brought a touching touch to the event, reminding everyone that the hope and future of heroes lay in the hands of the next generation. All Might, his voice deep and filled with emotion, addressed the audience, "Thank you all for being here. It is my honor to present these medals to our talented heroes in training. And a special thanks to this brave little girl, who reminds us that even on the hottest days, the heroic spirit never gives up." The girl smiled proudly, as the audience applauded fervently, creating an atmosphere of unity and hope. The ceremony was about to reach its climax, and all eyes were fixed on the stage, ready to celebrate the winners. Among those present, Midoriya couldn't help but recognize the little girl accompanying All Might. Eri, his adopted sister, looked radiant, with a smile so pure that it made his heart immediately relax. For a moment, Midoriya felt a pang of worry at seeing her so exposed in front of so many people, but seeing the happiness she radiated, his uneasiness vanished. It must have been Eri's idea, he thought with a soft smile, as his eyes briefly met hers. She must have asked All Might to let her hand out the medals, and knowing her, he probably couldn't say no. Seeing her like this, happy and free, gave Midoriya a renewed sense of peace. He knew how much Eri had suffered in the past, and how much he had worried her about his actions, but now, at this moment, she was a girl who enjoyed life, surrounded by heroes who protected her. And that, to him, was worth more than any medal. Although, if his sister was the one handing out the medals, it wasn't bad either, Midoriya thought with a warm smile. The idea of Eri being a part of such a special moment filled him with a sense of pride and relief. Finally, All Might stepped onto the podium with his imposing presence, accompanied by Eri, who carried the medals with a big smile. The little girl looked determined and excited for the opportunity to participate in the ceremony. All Might stood right in front of the third place, where Uraraka Ochako was waiting for him, her eyes shining with excitement and gratitude. "Young Uraraka, you have shown great courage and determination in this festival. Even though you took third place today, your potential is immense," All Might said with a warm smile, while Uraraka's eyes sparkled with excitement. "If you keep training and believing in yourself, I'm sure your path as a hero will be bright." Eri, still holding the medal, smiled shyly as she handed it over, and Uraraka, touched, accepted the award with a deep bow. The applause from the audience continued, acknowledging the young heroine's efforts. "Thank you, All Might. I will do my best to improve and become someone others can rely on," Uraraka replied with determination, causing the cheers and shouts of encouragement from the stands to intensify even further. The energy of the audience seemed to rise with each word, and the young heroine felt the warmth of their support. Eri, who was still watching Uraraka with a shy smile, moved a little closer and said softly, "Thank you for helping my brother in that fun game of chivalry." Uraraka, somewhat surprised by the comment, did not fully understand at first. However, at that moment she remembered that Midoriya had mentioned to her that he had a sister, and now she understood that this was that little girl that she had heard about. With a warm smile, Uraraka softly replied, "It was thanks to him that I was able to do it. He saved me when I needed it the most." Eri, with a look full of admiration and tenderness, nodded vigorously. "Yes, my brother is a hero," she said proudly, which made Uraraka smile even more. The bond Eri had with Midoriya was evident, and that small interaction added a touching moment to the ceremony, capturing the essence of the true spirit of heroes. The atmosphere in the stadium continued to be charged with excitement as All Might and Eri prepared to present the next medal. Todoroki Shoto's name echoed through the murmurs of the crowd, who watched in admiration as the young hero walked to the front with his usual calm and reserved expression. "Young Todoroki," All Might exclaimed in his unmistakable voice filled with energy and pride, "you have shown incredible mastery of your power, overcoming challenges both internal and external. This second place not only reflects your skill, but also your personal growth." Eri, with a curious look and a careful gesture, lifted the medal and offered it to Todoroki. The solemnity on his face was palpable, but as soon as he received the medal from the little girl's hands, his eyes softened. Perhaps, Eri's innocence brought a moment of calm to his thoughts. As he placed it around his neck, Todoroki bowed his head slightly in respect. "Thank you," he said in a calm voice, but with a tone that indicated that he deeply appreciated All Might's words and Eri's gesture. All Might smiled widely, knowing that Todoroki had traveled a difficult road to get to this point. "Remember, young Todoroki, your potential is immense. What you have achieved today is only the beginning." The stadium erupted in applause, as the image of Todoroki, with the medal hanging around his neck and his gaze fixed on the future, captured the essence of what it meant to be an ever-evolving hero. Eri, with her typical sweetness, added in a whisper, "Your fire and ice are very pretty." Todoroki, surprised by the comment, with a seriousness that characterized him, leaned slightly towards Eri, looking into her eyes. "I'm sorry for hurting your brother during the fight," he said in a low, but genuine tone, remembering his confrontation with Midoriya. Eri watched him for a moment, and then, with a sweet and comforting smile, shook her head. "Don't worry, I've already forgiven you," she replied with a tenderness that completely disarmed Todoroki's usual harshness. "Besides, your quirk is great. My brother thinks so too." That answer, so simple and pure, made the young hero smile softly and sincerely, something unusual for him. It was a gesture that, although discreet, would not go unnoticed by those who knew him. "Thank you," was the only thing Todoroki said, and in that brief exchange, both he and Eri seemed to understand each other on a deeper level, one where pain and healing connected. They had both been through dark times and carried scars invisible to others. Without another word, Todoroki bowed his head once more, a gesture of respect not only to Eri, but to everything she represented: hope, strength, and the possibility of a new beginning. Todoroki, after a thoughtful pause, quietly said to Eri, "I don't know what quirk you have, but don't let it get to you." His words, though simple, carried with them the weight of his own experience, of his struggle not to be pigeonholed by what others expected of him because of his power. Eri looked at him with her big eyes filled with curiosity and understanding. She nodded slightly, as if she was absorbing those words deep within her being. Even though she was small, she could feel the sincerity and wisdom behind what Todoroki was telling her. "I'll try it," Eri replied, her voice soft but determined. In that instant, they both shared a silent understanding. A quirk didn't always have to define someone, and they were both determined to forge their own path, in their own way. The moment between Todoroki and Eri was left behind as All Might stepped forward, calling out to the next person on the list, and now, the first place of this festival. Midoriya Izuku. The atmosphere in the stadium was tense with excitement as everyone turned their gazes towards Midoriya, who stepped up to the podium nervously, but with the determination that characterized him. The applause rang out loudly, but Midoriya barely noticed it, his attention completely on All Might and the little Eri at his side. Eri looked at him with eyes shining with admiration. "Hello, brother," she said softly, smiling shyly as she raised the medal, ready to hand it to him. Midoriya couldn't help but smile as he heard her call him brother. Happiness and pride mixed with surprise at seeing her there, so calm and self-assured. "Thank you, Eri," he whispered as he leaned down so she could hang the medal on him. All Might, with a proud smile, leaned towards Midoriya and said in a low voice, "You have proven to be much more than a hero, young Midoriya, even though you are part of another department. My student Melissa was not wrong when she said that you will be a great hero, and I know it too." Midoriya nodded, feeling deeply grateful for his words. "Thank you, All Might," he replied, his voice filled with emotion. From the side of the stage, Eri watched him with admiration and joy. "You're the best, bro. I'm so proud of you," she exclaimed, making Midoriya feel even more motivated. Her smile shone like a beacon of light, illuminating the moment with her innocent happiness. Smiling at this exchange, All Might turned to the crowd, who were all looking at him expectantly. "Now, I would like you all to join me in thanking all of the students who participated here today for your hard work and dedication. Each and every one of you has given your best, and that is what truly counts on this path to becoming heroes." The crowd erupted into a roar of applause, cheering on the young heroes who had worked so hard. The students, with beaming smiles on their faces, felt supported by the love and support of their community. All Might continued, "Remember that each of you has the potential to do great things. It's not just about winning medals or tournaments, but about growing, learning, and helping others. That's the essence of being a true hero." The students, feeling the weight of his words, exchanged looks of determination and hope. Midoriya, in particular, felt his heart beating harder than ever. He knew that this was just the beginning of his path, full of challenges and opportunities to prove his worth. With a determined look, All Might concluded, "Let's move forward together, and make this world a safer and brighter place. Let's fight for peace and justice." The applause intensified, resonating throughout the stadium and creating an echo of unity and purpose. At that moment, everyone present, including the students, felt that their future as heroes was promising and full of possibilities. As the sports festival came to a close, each of them carried with them not only memories of the competition, but also valuable lessons about friendship, perseverance, and the true meaning of being a hero. As the ceremony came to a close, the students hugged each other, celebrating their accomplishments and the strength they had found in their teamwork. Eri, lighting up the scene with her smile, looked at her brother and friends, feeling part of a community that would fight together for a better future. As the stadium lights shone in a vibrant display of colors, everyone knew that this festival had been more than just a competition, it had been a celebration of their growth as heroes and as people. In their hearts, they carried the promise that even though they would face hardships, they would never be alone on their path. And so, with a renewed sense of purpose and unity, the young heroes prepared to face whatever the future held, determined to make their mark on the world. The sports festival had closed its curtain, but the true spectacle of their lives was just beginning. From a high position, a man sat on the edge of a small building, looking out over the city of Hosu illuminated by the bright lights of the night. The gentle breeze caressed his face as his eyes, sharp as daggers, rested on the bustle of the streets filled with life. He wore a vest that carried with it several sharp weapons, and swords at his side. His mask and scarf moved slightly in the wind, while a satisfied smile appeared on his face, as he witnessed something he never expected. With his deep voice full of disdain, he began to talk to himself. That brat stood in front of those hypocrites, challenging them to their faces, shouting that their corrupt society will fall one day. His gaze intensified as he remembered the moment when that brat dared to speak, to expose the truth that others preferred to ignore. He had seen it all through television. His image resonated in his mind, each word an echo that vibrated within him. "Everyone is starting to notice thanks to that brat," he continued, his voice tinged with a mix of admiration and disdain. "They are starting to see that this society is full of hypocrisy and vanity. All those so-called heroes, that brat made them notice, exposed them to the world. They believed themselves invulnerable, untouchable on their pedestal of fame and success, but he shattered that illusion. With a simple shout, he planted the seed of doubt in everyone's minds. As expected of my stupid, cowardly disciple," he muttered with a bitter laugh, remembering their first meeting. He had seen potential in him, when he saved someone despite being weak and close to death. He remembered that spark that, although still inexperienced, could ignite a flame of change. But there was also a fragility in that brat, a desire for acceptance that weakened him and tied him to the chains of the society he himself despised. That was why he abandoned him to his fate, seeing that he was weak, thinking that he would die out there. However, he survived, and proved himself to be a true hero in that disgusting institution, cradle of false heroes. Even the greatest hero of all, All Might, recognized him as one. His tone turned cynical, but inside there was a spark of pride for what his disciple had achieved. "Midoriya, you lucky brat," he muttered, as if his words were filled with a great pride that he could barely contain. He was happy and, at the same time, angry. Happy that his disciple started a change, even if it was small, but it was still a change within this hypocritical and corrupt society. Angry that that brat ended up being part of the society of false heroes that he hated so much, and that had taught him what they were really like. At that moment, he heard a noise to his right and without thinking, he unsheathed his sword, pointing it in that direction. However, he found nothing but fog, a dark, purple fog that swirled around him, as if it had a life of its own. "Please calm down," the fog said, its voice soft but authoritative, reverberating in the night. "We are also looking for the same thing, hero killer, Stain." Stain, though intrigued, kept his guard up. He didn't know who this intruder was that dared to invade his space, but his instincts told him it wasn't just any enemy. "May I have a moment of your time?" The ethereal voice continued, and though the request was simple, but Stain sensed there was something else at play. Chapter text. The morning news echoed through households across Japan, a familiar echo in the daily routine. Television screens, mobile phones, and even street signs all showed the same thing, a crystal clear image of the recent UA Sports Festival, highlighting key moments. Like that young man, crossing the finish line first, leading his team in the cavalry battle, and finally defeating his opponents in one-on-one combat. The vibrant colors and action scenes seemed almost epic, but the real story was in the words that followed. The host, with an enthusiastic, yet cautious voice, opened the topic with a rehearsed smile. The recent winner of the UA Sports Festival, Midoriya Izuku, has sparked a nationwide debate upon revealing that he is quirkless. A strategic pause filled the room, as the camera shifted to show two presenters on the set. Behind them, footage of this young named Midoriya Izuku and his impressive exploits continued in a sequence. But the main presenter's smile soon gave way to an expression of intrigue, as if he were introducing a topic that could divide the nation. The second host, who chose to pursue the topic, spoke in a more measured voice. Despite not possessing a quirk, Midoriya not only competed on equal terms with some of the most promising aspiring heroes in the country, but also managed to defeat them. This feat has left many wondering, is it fair for someone without a quirk to participate in events designed for future heroes? The set was filled with tension as images of Midoriya Izuku in the middle of the festival continued to play on the screens, but this time, the background music was a bit somber. The next segment showed public comments, some citizens defending his merit, while others raised doubts about his place in the hero society. Interviewee 1, a middle-aged man, it's admirable, but if he doesn't have a quirk, can he really be considered a hero? We don't want people to start thinking that anyone can take the place of those who risk their lives for others. Interviewee 2, a young woman, I think what he did is amazing. If he can save lives and be a hero, what does it matter if he has a quirk or not? It's not having a quirk that makes him special. Interviewee 3, an older man, with a hard look, I've lived long enough to know that quirks aren't the only thing that matters in life, but when it comes to heroes, yes, I do believe they are necessary. We can't ignore that the world is full of superhuman threats. How can someone without a quirk stand up to that and protect us? Interviewee 4, a young mother, for me, Midoriya is a hero, regardless of whether he has a quirk or not. My children look up to him as an example, and I think it's good for them to know that, with or without power, anyone can make a difference if they try hard enough. Interviewee 5, a skeptical teenager, I'm not saying what he did was wrong, but, I don't know. There's a reason heroes have quirks. If anyone could be a hero just by being smart, then what about those of us born with quirks? Are we losing our place? Interviewee 6, a professional heroine, as a heroine, I know that quirks aren't everything. Sure, they give us an advantage in combat, but being a hero is so much more than that. Midoriya has something that many don't, heart and determination. Those are just as important as any quirk. The debate is valid, but in the end, it's the results that count. The next segment showed clips from social media, where the debate over Midoriya was raging. Some users were passionately defending his achievement, highlighting his intelligence and effort, while others were demanding a revision of the festival rules, arguing that allowing the use of advanced technology instead of quirks was a form of unfair disadvantage for the other competitors. The host reappeared in front of the camera, his expression more serious as he spoke to the audience. The reactions have not been long in coming, and while many celebrate Midoriya as a symbol of perseverance, others consider his victory to represent a challenge to the established heroic system, a system that relies primarily on the innate abilities of quirks. The broadcast continued with footage from the Hero Public Safety Commission, HPSC, hinting at the movements behind the scenes. The camera briefly panned to various members in a meeting room, with a special focus on the chairwoman, who was leading the meeting with a calculating countenance. Although the HPSC had not made any official statements, rumors were already circulating about a possible review of the policies for future hero events. The second announcer took over, speaking in a more neutral tone but making the growing tension clear. Although the HPSC has yet to issue a direct statement regarding Midoriya, it has been mentioned that they are reviewing the regulations of the sports festival. The intention is to ensure that the use of advanced technology does not distort the purpose of these events, designed to measure the natural talent of students with quirks. Conflict was brewing. While some saw him as an inspiration, others, like the HPSC, seemed to be preparing the ground to confront him. The battle for public perception was beginning to intensify, and the young hero found himself at the center of the storm. Comments and debates multiplied, fragmenting popular opinion into ever more extreme factions. As discussions raged on social media and in the news, Midoriya's figure became more complex, almost mythical. Images of his exploits at the festival, where he had shown that determination and intelligence could surpass even innate abilities, were intertwined with questions from those who doubted his legitimacy. And in the end, it all came down to one simple question that resonated in every corner of Japan: who is Midoriya Izuku? Is he just a quirkless young man who dared to defy the norm, or is he the embodiment of a new kind of hero who could redefine what it means to be a true hero, where the strength of quirks had always reigned supreme? As the train moved forward, the gentle rocking helped me relax. I looked out the window, watching the cityscape transform into a sea of buildings and lights fading into the distance. UA had given us 3 days to relax, something all students needed after the hectic sports festival. However, my mind kept spinning back to the recent controversy over my victory. I didn't really care that I had won first place. My goal had always been to do my best to help Eri, and I had succeeded. I had earned a great deal of money from dealing with Melissa and promoting her inventions, which had allowed me to give Eri some things she really wanted. It wasn't just about the material things, but about being able to give her the happiness and stability she deserved. As the train moved forward, it allowed me a moment of reflection, though not entirely a quiet one. The gentle clattering was almost hypnotic, but thoughts continued to swirl through my head, each one louder than the last. The controversy over my participation in the festival and the negative attention it was attracting wasn't something that affected me that directly, but I thought about Eri. She didn't have to be involved in all of this. Her happiness and peace of mind would always be my priority, and I wouldn't let anything I did affect her negatively. I sighed, remembering the conversation with Director Nezu. The director had offered me a place in the hero course, something that, honestly, took me by surprise. Despite my initial refusal, Nezu respected my decision, although Nezu asked me to reconsider. The director told me that he saw in me the potential to be a key piece for the aspiring heroes, someone who could bring a different, more human perspective in a world dominated by quirks. Honestly, I didn't want to be part of such an environment, one that I didn't like. However, I told him that I would think about it, of course, but being a hero. I admit that it was my childhood dream, but now I have more responsibilities instead of continuing to think about those dreams. I still remember what happened at the sports festival. And it was no surprise that after my fight with Bakugo, the police chief, Suragame Kenji, suggested some sort of therapy. Even though I had won, the battle had not only been physical, but emotional, and I had almost lost control of myself at a critical moment. The rage I felt towards Bakugo, that anger built up from years of bullying and contempt. I was scared to realize how close I had come to unleashing it completely, which would have marked me forever. The police chief surely saw it too, and although he didn't say it directly, his concern was evident. Suragame offered me help, a way to better control and understand my emotions. I wasn't surprised by the offer, but I accepted. I knew I couldn't afford to lose control like that again, not if I wanted to continue protecting Eri. As the train began to slow down, approaching my destination, I couldn't help but think about what lay ahead. The police chief had been clear with one of his recommendations: face my past, head on. If the weight of those memories continued to torment me, if the anger and pain of the past didn't go away, then the only way to overcome it was to face it head on, without running away. That's why I was now on my way to that small place that held so many memories, even if few of them were pleasant. Aldera High School, a place I would never remember fondly. It was there where bullying had become a constant, a routine that taught me, through pain, what it meant to be quirkless in a world obsessed with quirks. It was a place that never offered me comfort, only loneliness. I also had to visit what was once my home, a place where my mother and I shared years of silent struggle. Before the tragedy, I asked Melissa to take care of Eri while I made this trip, and she agreed immediately, without a shred of hesitation. I am grateful that Eri adores her so much. I admit that Melissa has been one of the few people I can fully trust, and knowing that Eri is in good hands gives me the peace of mind that I so desperately need right now. The train finally came to a stop, and the doors opened with a soft creak. I took a deep breath, letting the fresh air fill my lungs as the nerves slowly settled in my chest. I didn't know exactly what emotions would hit me as I faced these memories again, but I had to. The words of the police chief, Suragame, echoed in my mind: if you don't face your past, it will continue to weigh on you. Stepping off the train, I adjusted the hood of my jacket and made sure the mask covered my face properly. Since I won the sports festival, public attention had grown exponentially. People were starting to recognize me on the street, some looking at me with admiration, others with doubt or even resentment. I didn't want to be the center of attention, and fame was a burden I hadn't asked for. In fact, I loathed it. I walked with my head down, trying to go unnoticed. The streets that led me back to Aldera High School hadn't changed much. They were familiar, but now they seemed to be covered in an invisible fog of sadness that only I could feel. There was something suffocating about this place, as if the very air was heavy with all the memories I was trying to leave behind. The sidewalks, which I had once walked down with a mix of fear and resignation, now felt heavy under my feet, as if with each step the past wanted to claim its place in my mind. It was impossible to ignore the scars I had accumulated here, not just emotional ones, but physical ones. Scars that, though hidden, still hurt. It was as if these streets were permeated with an oppressive energy, constantly reminding me of who I had been and all I had endured. Arriving in front of the school, I watched the students come and go, some in a hurry to get there on time, others laughing and chatting as if they had no care in the world. It was still early, so I took advantage of the moment and took off my hood and mask, trying not to arouse suspicion. At that moment, I realized something I may have already known: nothing had really changed. The building was still just as gloomy, the walls seemed to harbor the same echoes of the past. And in my mind, inevitably, memories of Katsuki, of the other boys who used to surround me here, arose. What would they think now, after all he had accomplished? It wasn't something I really cared about, but that question, one I hadn't asked myself for a long time, crossed my mind for a moment. The cruel laughter, the insults, all those moments were still there, like invisible scars that wouldn't go away, no matter how hard I tried to ignore them. I could have shouted their names, confronted them, or even agreed to interviews with reporters seeking to learn more about my past. I could have revealed everything I experienced at this school, exposed every humiliation and emotional blow I suffered. I didn't do it. The truth is, even though I still feel angry, even though Bakugo's figure provokes that spark of resentment that has never completely disappeared, it is no longer something that controls me. Neither Bakugo nor the boys who made my life impossible here. They are not worth it. I took a deep breath, letting it out as calmly as I tried to put those thoughts behind me. I was here for something more, to close this chapter for myself, not for them. I just wanted to see it with my own eyes, this episode of my past, and never return. I wondered what I would do now, standing in front of that school. I couldn't go in or do much more than watch. And maybe that was all I needed. To see it, to accept it, and to move on. All the weight of those past years seemed lighter now, as if facing the place would help me let go of what I had carried for so long. As I was about to leave, something unexpected happened. In front of me, I saw two familiar figures approaching, and although time had passed, I recognized them instantly: Midoriya and Nakamura Aiko. My heart skipped a beat, not out of nostalgia, but because of the vivid memory they represented. How can we forget them? Midoriya, who once, on Valentine's Day, sent me a letter saying that my green hair and thin build made me look like a broccoli. Clearly, she was making fun of me. A boy found the letter and showed it to everyone. That day, I was born with a new nickname, Mido Broccoli. It was cruel in its simplicity, and it still echoed in my mind every time I heard it. Eventually, everyone got bored of that nickname and went back to calling me Deku. And then there was Nakamura Aiko, who had done something even worse. She had met me at a secluded place, pretending she wanted to talk to me in private. But when I arrived, she and her friends threw buckets of water at me, just to record it and upload it as a viral video on the internet. In the end, they didn't do it, or at least that's what I remember, but the humiliation stuck with me. Now, they were both in front of me, staring at me. Even though I hadn't thought about them for a while, Those memories came back clearly, as if I had lived them yesterday. They both seemed surprised to see me. With all that had been published about my victory at the sports festival, it wasn't hard to figure out who I was. I really hated being famous. I wondered if they had changed over the years. Were they still the same people who enjoyed humiliating others for fun? Or maybe time had brought them to reflect, as it had me, and they were here for another reason. Midoriya? Yuki asked, her voice mixed with disbelief and curiosity. I nodded slightly, keeping my expression neutral. I didn't want to show them what I really felt when I saw them, that mix of discomfort and anger that I tried to control. I had learned a lot since those days, but I was not immune to my past. Aiko, who was usually more outgoing, stepped forward. Her gaze seemed nervous, but I wasn't sure if it was from surprise or something else. We didn't expect to see you here, she said, her tone a little softer than I remembered. I shrugged, not exactly sure how to respond. I didn't feel like exchanging pleasantries, but I didn't want to be hostile either. I was here for myself, not them. I was just passing by, I replied, trying to sound casual. I had no intention of staying any longer than necessary. The silence that followed was awkward, and for a moment I thought maybe they felt it too. Or maybe they were just looking for something else to say. I didn't care what they had to say to me, though, so I just turned my back on them and started walking. But just as I was about to take the first step, I heard a scream. Both of them, in unison, called out to me with unexpected sincerity, "We are so sorry." I stopped dead in my tracks, my steps interrupted by those words that floated in the air like an echo of my memories. Was it possible that they really felt bad about what had happened? Or did they just feel sorry now that they saw that I was famous? I looked over my shoulder and found them wearing expressions of genuine regret. There was something in their eyes I hadn't seen before, as if time had caused them to reflect on their actions. For an instant, a spark of confusion ignited within me. I didn't know how to respond. Should I just leave them behind, ignore what they had said and move on with my life? Or, on the contrary, should I give them a chance to explain themselves, to understand if they had really changed? The decision was mine, and although the past had marked me in ways that still hurt, the future was in my hands. I felt a mix of emotions building in my chest. The resentment I had nursed for years, curiosity about their regrets, and, for a moment, the possibility of a heart-to-heart. Their faces were tense, as if they were waiting for a verdict. The tension in the air was palpable, and my mind was grappling with old wounds and the chance for a new beginning. With a sigh, I slowly turned to them. When they saw me, they instantly bowed slightly in forgiveness, as if they feared that their presence might trigger my anger. "Don't do that," I told them, holding up a hand to stop them. I didn't want them to feel any smaller than they already looked. "If you want to talk, let's talk." My voice trembled slightly, a reflection of the internal struggle I was experiencing. Despite what had happened, I felt there was room for conversation, something I had never imagined in those days of humiliation. They both stood up straight, looking into each other's eyes. "We didn't know what we were doing," Yuki began, her voice shaking a little. "We were young, foolish, reckless. And now, seeing you here, I can't help but feel ashamed of how we acted." Aiko nodded, her gaze fixed on the ground. "We never thought it would affect you like that. It was just a game for us, a way to have fun. But now I understand that it was wrong, very wrong." Her words echoed in my mind, and part of me wanted to hold on to my resentment, to my right to be upset. But another part of me, one that had learned to see beyond appearances, was beginning to contemplate the possibility of change. "You don't need to worry," I began, pausing to gather my thoughts and prevent anger from taking over. "That's all in the past." Yuki and Aiko's gazes turned from surprise to understanding, as if my words offered them a new perspective. "I accept your apologies, just don't tell the others that I was here." The tension in the air eased a little, and I saw a slight smile appear on Yuki's lips. "We promise," she said, her voice a little lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Aiko dared to look up, and in her eyes I saw a mix of relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Midoriya." The sincerity of their thanks made me feel a glimmer of warmth, but deep down I knew my life was moving on, with or without them. I didn't want to get stuck in a moment that no longer defined me. Before I left, though, I decided to offer them a small gesture of goodwill. "I wish you luck," I muttered, not looking back. I turned around and started walking away, feeling that by saying goodbye to them, I was closing another chapter of my life. It was a step forward, a chance to leave the shadows of the past behind and move forward towards what really mattered. As I walked, a light breeze blew around me, taking with it the weight of the history that had once haunted me. Maybe, just maybe, this was what it meant to grow up, to learn to forgive and, more importantly, to learn to move on. However, as I walked away, a question loomed in my mind. Were my other classmates sorry too? Would any of them dare apologize to me? I could seek out those teachers who had hurt me in the past, confront them, even call them out for not being there when I needed them most. I could imagine myself doing so, letting out all those pent-up emotions. But deep down, I knew I wouldn't. I had said they were part of my past, and the past was a dull thing, full of memories, both good and bad. And then, I remembered my next goal, the place where my old house was. I hadn't lived there for long, but I still felt the need to visit it. That house had been the scene of so many moments, both of joy and sadness. My mother did everything she could to give me as normal a life as possible, despite the difficulties. I owe her much more than I can ever repay. Before the tragedy, as I often referred to it, that house had always been a refuge, a place where laughter resonated and troubles seemed far away. Yet it was also a reminder of how fragile our happiness was, how in an instant everything could change. Every corner held echoes of shared laughter and whispered secrets, but also the shadow of a loss that loomed over me. As I approached the old neighborhood, my thoughts raced through my mind. I wondered if the place still held some of the essence of what it once was. Perhaps, by returning, I could find a sense of closure, a chance to reconnect with my roots and honor the memory of what I lost. In the end, when I arrived, I just stopped near the house. I just stood there looking out, feeling the past and present collide inside me. The house had changed. The fresh paint shone in the sun, and the once neglected garden now looked tidy, with flowers that seemed to be blooming into new life. Everything looked different, and yet everything was familiar. I remembered that, some time ago, my mother and I had planned to move into an apartment complex. Maybe it was a decision to save money, or maybe to look for a new beginning after what had happened. But the truth was that I no longer knew for sure. The reasons had blurred with the passage of time, becoming shadows of a past that still haunted me. As I looked around the house, a wave of memories came over me, memories of sunny days, laughter echoing through the halls, and the warmth of freshly cooked food. But behind that warmth, there was also a deep pain. I thought of those little games we played, where I acted like a big hero, the savior who always protected my mother from the bad guys. It was a fantasy that made me feel powerful in a world where I felt so powerless. I went through the corners of my memory, where her soft voice would sing me a song every time she saw me sad. She would hold me tightly, as if her love could keep at bay the darkness that sometimes threatened to consume us. "You will always be my light, Izuku," she would tell me those words, and in those moments, I believed that she could be alone. What light could I offer her when my own existence felt so bleak? Memories of my father, of his abandonment following my diagnosis as Quirkless, hit me harder than any blow I had ever received before. He had left our lives as quickly as he had arrived, leaving my mother alone in a battle she did not choose, with the burden of a life she could barely sustain. In her struggle to keep me happy, she never treated me with contempt. On the contrary, she always offered me her unconditional love, even when I myself did not know how to deal with the pain that surrounded me. I didn't want to worry her, so I never told her how bad I was having it at school. The whispers and laughter behind my back felt like sharp knives, the weight of judgment from other kids who made fun of me, of my dream of being a hero, a Quirkless being a hero. What a joke, I used to think, as the words echoed in my mind like a cruel one. When I came home, she was always there, waiting for me with open arms, as if she could absorb all my pain and make it bearable. I knew she was sad, and she must have thought it was because I knew I would never be a hero. But the truth was more complicated. It was the weight of a lifetime of feeling like I could never live up to the expectations others had of me. Her stress was evident, in the way her hands shook slightly as she prepared dinner or in the way her eyes darkened behind the brightness of her smile. She tried to keep up the facade of the perfect mother, but I could see the wrinkles of worry forming on her forehead, the sleepless nights she spent trying to find solutions to problems she should never have had to carry alone. I remember nights when I would wake up to find her sitting in the kitchen, the dim light of the lamp illuminating her tired face as she stared out the window, as if she was waiting for everything to get better any moment. I wished I could comfort her, tell her everything would be okay, that I was grateful for every sacrifice she made for me. But the fear of hurting her kept me silent. As time went on, my own pain intensified, and even though she did her best to keep me afloat, I couldn't help but feel like I was a weight on her, a burden. This internal struggle became a vicious cycle. I tried hard to smile and maintain the appearance of a happy child, but at the end of the day, that same smile left me empty, unable to release the sadness that was building up inside me. If only I could be what she wants me to be, I kept telling myself that. The image of a hero that I had nurtured since I was a child was fading, leaving behind a trail of insecurity. I had always dreamed of being strong, but I felt like I was just a helpless child in a world that did not forgive weakness. And then that tragedy happened. A villain attacked us, his laughter rumbling through the air like an ominous echo, ringing in my ears like a warning. My mother, always so strong and determined, pushed me with all her might to get me to safety. "Run, Izuku. Run!" she screamed, her voice filled with terror, but also with an unconditional love that I could never forget. I ran, my legs moving quickly, but my heart was heavy as a rock, each beat resonating with the echo of her voice. I ran into the distance, to the place where heroes always appeared, where hope could be reborn, where I believed I could find salvation for her. But when I arrived, I was faced with the most heartbreaking disappointment of all. "We cannot intervene. We must wait for a hero with the most suitable quirk for this situation," the heroes said with a heartbreaking coldness, as if they were evaluating a simple transaction rather than a life at stake. "Do something!" I screamed, my voice cracking with panic and desperation. Rage burned in my chest as I looked at them, their shiny uniforms seeming to mock me. Their impassive faces reflected an indifference that felt like betrayal. But they, in their passivity, only looked at me with pity, as if my tears were just an inconvenience. "Calm down, kid. We'll wait for another hero." Those moments became eternal, an endless cycle of helplessness and horror. I ran back to my mother, desperate to save her, but just as I was close, one of those heroes stopped me, his hands firm on my shoulders. "It's dangerous, don't come closer," he said, but his words were a knife to my heart, cutting through any glimmer of hope I might still have. Time faded away as I watched, paralyzed, as the villain lunged at her, a dark shadow threatening to devour the light that had illuminated my life. It was too late. I saw him attack her, her body fall lifeless to the ground. The scream that escaped my mouth was a mix of horror and sadness, a sound that resonated like an echo of my helplessness. The villain, mercilessly, took control of her body, as if my mother's essence was just an object to be manipulated. By the time the required hero arrived on the scene, it was already too late. They had no choice but to take down the villain, but the devastation didn't stop there. In one move, they took with them my mother's body, the person I had known and loved the most, now a memory stripped of her soul. I saw it all, my mind refusing to forget that moment, trapped in a loop of pain and confusion. Tears welled up in my eyes, each one a reflection of the rage and suffering that filled me. Amidst that sea of emotions, a voice echoed through the crowd of heroes who had arrived too late. I still remember his words, that question. "That was stupid, kid, why did you run there?" Those words, that question spoken by a hero, sounded like a blow to my chest, as if he were mocking my despair. At that moment, sadness turned to anger. All the pain I had been repressing came out in a torrent of rage. Without thinking, I raised my fist and punched the hero in the face, feeling the bones crunch under my hand. I would have continued to hit him, venting on him all the frustration accumulated by years of suffering, of humiliation, of helplessness, of that fateful moment, of not being able to save my mother. But others stopped me, their firm hands gripping my arms, trying to contain my storm. "You fools, you didn't save her," I screamed, my voice torn with pain and fury. The words felt like a battle cry, an echo of my desperation ringing in the air. The crowd backed away, looking at me with a mix of shock and disdain, but I couldn't care less. I had lost everything, and my mother couldn't come back. At that moment, I felt like the world was going black, as if the light of my life had been completely extinguished. In my mind, an echo resonated: why didn't they do anything? Why didn't they save her? Each question was another nail in the coffin of my faith in heroes. Those who were meant to protect, those who had failed. Amidst the anguish, the image of her smile faded, and with it, the last vestige of my childhood. Unable to bear the weight of sadness any longer, I decided to escape from that place. I didn't know how I did it, but I ran away from the chaos and despair. I took refuge in a dark alley, surrounded by the shadows of the city, a place where the pain felt a little more tolerable. There, loneliness embraced me like a treacherous friend, and silence became my only company. But fate had other plans. In the midst of my desolation, I heard screams, a voice crying out for help. Adrenaline flooded my veins. Without thinking, I ran towards the sound, regardless of the danger. When I arrived, I saw someone cornered, vulnerable. Without hesitation, I jumped into the fight, ready to help. But the violence came back to me like an echo of what I had suffered. The person in danger escaped, but a brutal blow hit me, and everything went black. The last image I saw was of a fist rising towards me, before the darkness engulfed me. And then, at that moment, I stopped. Suddenly, the stream of memories faded like a mirage, and reality hit me hard. There I was, standing in the middle of the empty street, sweating, my body shaking and my mind full of chaos. I realized something that made me boil with rage: I wasn't crying. There were no tears running down my cheeks, only cold sweat beating on my forehead and despair burning in my chest. And that made me very angry. Why don't I cry? Why can't I let the pain out? Frustration consumed me, like a fire that devoured everything in its path. Was I so weak that I couldn't even cry for my mother? Anger welled up inside me, a mixture of helplessness and self-loathing that seemed impossible to bear. I felt like a shadow of my former self, a child who had lost not only his mother but also his faith in himself. The thought ate away at me, and sadness intertwined with rage, forming a whirlwind that threatened to devour me completely. But, in the midst of my internal storm, a familiar voice broke the silence. "Izuku, is that you?" I recognized the voice. She was Katsuki's mother, Bakugo Mitsuki. Her tone, full of concern and tenderness, made me realize that I was not as alone as I thought. I heard her approaching behind me and my heart raced. I had forgotten that her house was nearby. I didn't want to look. I didn't want her to see me in this state, trapped in my own personal hell. There was a part of me that thought of her as an aunt, a member of my family, but another part of me wondered what I could say to her after all these years. What to say? The words stuck in my throat, and every attempt to articulate a thought vanished in the haze of my emotions. "Izuku, don't you remember me? It's me, your Aunt Mitsuki." Hearing my name again, a burst of emotions overwhelmed me. I felt like the weight of the world was falling on my shoulders. Mitsuki's voice, so kind, was a painful contrast to the fury that consumed me. Her closeness only made the anguish intensify. Every word of her felt like a noose, tightening my chest and suffocating any attempt at connection. Without thinking, I took a step back, turning my back on her voice. The urge to escape washed over me, like a primal impulse pushing me toward freedom, away from all of this. I had felt that impulse before, a compelling need to run away from my fears and memories. Even though I knew I was running away, I didn't stop. I kept running, feeling the cold wind cutting my face and the shadows lengthening around me. The night became a refuge, a dark blanket where I could lose myself. My legs burned and my lungs screamed for air, but I didn't care. The echo of her voice kept resonating in my mind, and every time I thought about stopping, anger and pain would once again flow through my heart. Finally, the urge to catch my breath came over me as I realized I was in a dark alley. The walls were covered in graffiti, and the smell of waste and dampness enveloped me. I leaned against one of the walls, trying to calm the accelerated rhythm of my heart. It was a corner of the city that felt like a reflection of my own despair. One that looked familiar to me. I remembered that time, after fleeing from that scene, trying to avoid the police and the heroes, when I hid in alleys like this. That's how it all happened. I saved a woman, I got her to run away, but I ended up beaten. The darkness had caught me again, a place I knew all too well. When I woke up, those men were no longer there, only he remained. The man who appeared before me had a terrifying appearance. He had swords hanging from his back, and his black clothing made him look like a shadow in the darkness. However, what struck me most were his eyes, sharp as daggers, which seemed to pierce the darkness that enveloped me, as if they could see into the depths of my soul. "Brat, you risked your life to save that mutant woman. Why did you?" he asked me in a deep, resonant voice, like thunder in the distance. My answer was simple and direct. Because she was in danger. There was no doubt in my heart. That instinct to protect others had always been there, latent and powerful. The man smiled, a strange expression on his face that belied his intimidating appearance. It was a gesture that defied hopelessness, as if he could see something in me that I couldn't. Then he asked me another question that struck a chord in me. "Tell me, do you want to be a hero?" "I don't have a quirk, I can't be a hero." My words came out of my mouth in a whisper of defeat, but also of longing. I knew that the rules of this world would always be against me, and I accepted that. He just laughed, a laugh that echoed in the empty alley, bouncing off the graffiti-covered walls. "This society is full of false heroes," he said in a grave tone, his voice deep as the ocean. "Heroes who only seek fame, money, and recognition. They put on the cape not out of a genuine desire to help, but out of a need to be admired, to be seen as superior. And in their quest for glory, they forget about the most important thing, the people. True heroes protect, care for, and fight for others, regardless of the rewards." Despite all the pain in my body, I didn't understand anything. The words echoed in my mind like a distant echo I could barely reach. But there was something in his voice, a raw truth that made me want to hear more. The man continued, with an intensity that made me feel alive in the midst of my suffering. There was a fire in his gaze that captivated me, as if he could see right through me, laying bare my fears and longings. "That is why, despite everything, you, boy," he screamed at the dark sky, his voice rising like a roar, rumbling in my chest. "You are a hero." Hearing his words, I stood frozen, unable to process his statement. The truth was, I didn't know if I was really a hero, but at that moment, a spark of happiness sprouted inside me, like a small flash in the deep darkness that surrounded me. It was a new feeling, a mixture of pride and confusion, a fire that began to burn in my heart. Someone else believed in me when no one else did. The thought washed over me, and I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Here I was, on the edge of despair, and yet someone had seen me for what I truly was, an attempt to do good, a desire to protect. The man offered me a choice, a proposition that would change my life: come with him or die here, like a hero. The choice presented itself to me like a path illuminated through the shadows. And without much thought, with determination blossoming within me, I agreed to go with him. I didn't know what was waiting for me, but I felt like it was the first step towards a destiny I had been searching for my whole life. It was a chance to be more than just a boy without a quirk, to become something more, someone who could make a difference. Soon, I stopped remembering, and without realizing it, I calmed down. I was at peace with myself. Maybe because, despite everything, I had saved someone, that mutant woman whom I was able to protect from a terrible fate. Despite the darkness that surrounded me, I had been able to do the right thing. And not just her, she had also saved Eri, and in the process, she had saved me. I don't know, maybe I felt like I really did something good in my life. As I thought about that, a question popped into my mind: where is that mutant woman now? I just hoped she was okay. Deep down, I wished I didn't have to save her again. I laughed a little, although deep down, I wasn't sure what I was really longing for. Determined, I got up from that dirty wall and left the alley. Daylight hit me softly, a contrast to the darkness I had left behind. Stepping outside, I was greeted by the feed from a giant screen mounted on a nearby building. It was one of those electronic advertisements that always showed news or propaganda for heroes. But this time, it was the sports festival that was being broadcast. The scene was vibrant, full of colors and laughter. In an instant, the screen showed my image, with one of my arms raised high, as all might proclaimed me the winner of the festival. The smile, my smile that was transmitted at that moment, was contagious, a reflection of everything I had achieved. Although I don't remember that moment well, because I was focused on Eri at that moment, a part of me recognizes that I was happy on that occasion. I didn't know it then, but now, as I look at the screen, that feeling wells up inside me like a warm light. It was pure, selfless happiness, a genuine connection to all those around me. I decided to go back home, where Eri was in the company of Melissa, who was lovingly caring for her. Eri was not part of my past or my future, nor is she simply my present. She is my sister, and I promised that I would give her the life she deserves, a life free of suffering, pain and anger. So I set out on the path home, with a light heart and a clear mind. I knew I could build a new future for us. And though there were still wounds to heal and demons to face, the determination to protect Eri drove me forward. As I walked, I couldn't help but think of my Aunt Mitsuki. Maybe, one day, I would visit her, maybe I could share with her what I have learned, how much I have grown. Maybe I would find a way to open my heart and leave behind the fear that had kept me away. With each step I took, I felt more at peace. It was a new beginning, and I was ready to face it. The evening news blared through the channel, with a topic that has generated constant debate in modern society: heteromorphs. These individuals, whose physical characteristics have been drastically altered by their quirks, often take on the appearance of mutants or animals, which has made them the target of prejudice and distrust. In the society of heroes, where an individual's worth is measured by their actions, heteromorphs face a different reality. Often viewed with suspicion for their unusual appearances, many of them are stigmatized as potential threats, even villains, just because of their physical features. This prejudice has affected both their daily lives and their integration into the working and social world, the presenter reported in a serious tone. The image switched to a stock shot showing several heteromorphs walking through the streets, their unusual physical features visible to all. Some had scaly skin, others had animal limbs, tails, or faces that looked more like those of fantastical creatures than humans. The looks of distrust, disgust, and even fear of the passers-by were palpable, marking the clear divide between those with normal quirks and those with an out-of-the-ordinary appearance. For many heteromorphs, these kinds of reactions had become part of their everyday lives, deeply affecting their emotional well-being and social integration. No matter how much I try to show that I am a normal person, people always see me as a monster first, confessed one young heteromorph in an archival interview, with small wings on his back and an elongated jaw giving him a reptilian appearance. The stigma associated with heteromorphs has had devastating consequences. Many of them face discrimination not only on the streets, but also in their workplaces, in education, and even in accessing basic services. Employers hesitate to hire them, fearing that their appearance will unsettle clients or create tensions in work teams. Schools, although formally inclusive, are not always prepared to deal with the constant harassment that heteromorphic youth suffer. I've lost 3 jobs in less than a year. They say it's not because of my looks, but I know it is. It's always the same, shared another person with a quirk that gave him the appearance of a werewolf. His voice denoted the tiredness of an endless fight against prejudice. This constant rejection leads many heteromorphs to social marginalization. Without opportunities and facing a cycle of discrimination, some fall into despair. In the worst cases, these individuals are pushed towards criminal behavior or, worse still, they are perceived as villains before they even have a chance to show who they really are. It's easier for them to label me as dangerous before they even know me. They don't even need to know my name, they've already decided what I am, said another interviewee, whose quirk gave him horns and skin similar to that of a rhinoceros. The report concluded by highlighting the lack of effective laws protecting heteros from discrimination, leaving these individuals in a vulnerable position with few avenues to defend their rights. While society continues to celebrate heroes, many heteros feel that they can never be truly accepted, no matter how noble or worthy their actions are. This systematic rejection has had lasting consequences on the self-esteem and identity of heteromorphs, perpetuating a cycle of exclusion and marginalization that affects every aspect of their lives. The emotional and social isolation they experience has led many of them to face a life of loneliness and constant internal struggles. What can we do? The news anchor asked, his voice filled with concern. Is there any place where they don't look at you like that? The answer came immediately, with the image changing to a more welcoming and warm corner. Indeed, there is a place, he said, as the screen showed the shelter coffee shop, a small establishment in the city of Hosu, where most of the workers and customers were heteromorphic. This place had become a sanctuary, a refuge in the literal sense, where those who have been rejected for their appearance could feel welcome, accepted and understood. With seating designed to accommodate all body types and an atmosphere of respect and camaraderie, the cafe offered not only food and drink, but also something far more valuable, a space where diversity was celebrated and where no one was judged by their appearance. Founded by a heteromorphic woman and her father, the shelter had become a symbol of resistance and hope for those who had suffered the weight of rejection and discrimination. Here, nobody looks at you strangely, one of the workers there commented with a warm smile. It's a place where everyone belongs. The report concluded with an image of the cafeteria, full of life and joy, showing how, in a world divided by prejudice, there are still small spaces of hope where acceptance and inclusion can flourish. At the shelter cafe, diversity was not only respected, it was celebrated. Every corner of the place was designed to accommodate all types of people, regardless of the nature of their quirk. Tables and chairs were designed to fit a variety of body types. Some were larger for those who needed extra space, others lower or wider for those with unusual limbs, and there were reinforced seats for mutants with tails, wings, or bulky shapes. No one was seen differently, and all customers were treated warmly and welcomingly. At shelter, appearance or abilities didn't matter, all that counted was enjoying a good meal in a totally accepting environment. One of the workers behind the counter was a mutant, as were several of her co-workers. One of them was in charge of bringing orders to the tables, while another attended to the diverse clientele, each with a unique quirk. The head cook, also a mutant, was one of the founders of Shelter. Her imposing height and thick fur made her stand out, but it was precisely that difference that motivated her to create this place. She wanted everyone, regardless of their appearance or abilities, to have a space where they felt welcome. At Shelter, no one was considered strange, because everyone shared a uniqueness that united them. One day, while preparing an order, her eyes drifted to the screen mounted on one of the cafeteria's walls. The large television was showing the events of the UA Academy Sports Festival, and although she was used to seeing the exploits of heroes, something about the broadcast captured her attention. All Might, the symbol of peace, was raising the arm of a victorious young man, proclaiming him the winner. What really made her heart race was the name that appeared in the caption below the image, Midoriya Izuku. The young man, with green hair and a scar on his face that gave him a somewhat intimidating air, was unmistakable. Her breathing stopped for a moment as she put down what she was preparing and moved a little closer to the screen, unable to take her eyes off his figure. Although his face had taken on a more mature and serious tone, he was still the same boy who had risked his life for her. In that dark and dangerous alley, this boy had risked his life to save her. He was the brave hero who had saved her in a moment of danger. And even though she ran away on that occasion, with her heart pounding and a nagging concern for her well-being, she couldn't shake the feeling that something bad might have happened to him. Fear enveloped her, and her own thoughts echoed in her mind. Why hadn't she done more to help him? That guilt consumed her, and when she returned to the alley where she had left him, she found only heroes and police patrolling the area. His figure was no longer there. She left the place with a heavy heart, fearing the worst. Despite not knowing his name, deep inside her was a desire to honor the life he had helped save, her life. She created the coffee shop, Shelter, with the help of her father, who had passed away 2 years ago. She remembered her father fondly, his teachings about the importance of community and creating a safe space where no one felt different. She had put her heart into that place, making sure that every customer felt welcome and valued, no matter their appearance or abilities. Now, As she watched the image of the young man on television, her heart filled with deep gratitude and a spark of hope. Midoriya Izuku, the boy who had once been in danger, was now celebrated as a hero. She smiled, feeling inspired by his bravery. Perhaps, in some ways, she had done the right thing by creating this cafe, a place where every person, no matter their history, could feel at home. Maybe, one day, she could find a way to thank him, to give something back for his heroic act. As her mind wandered through memories of that day, the voice of one of her classmates interrupted her. "Josei, where is the order?" Josei came back to reality, blinking. She looked around, trying to remember when she had lost track of the conversation. "Oh, sorry, I was thinking about something important. I'll do it right away, sorry." Her partner nodded, leaving the kitchen, though her expression still held concern. Josei watched her go, feeling a knot in her stomach. She knew she should focus on the task at hand, but her mind kept drifting back to the past. As she began to organize the order, she recalled the moment when that hero had stepped in, risking his own life to save her. The image of his bravery filled her with admiration and a spark of inspiration. What could I do to show my appreciation? She wondered, the aroma of food cooking in the background serving as a reminder of the reality around her. Suddenly, an idea crossed her mind. Maybe a small gesture, something meaningful, could be enough to show him how I felt. With renewed determination, she began to work on the order with more energy. She knew that although she still had to find a way to express her gratitude, she was willing to do her best to do so once the expected moment arrived. After all, in a world where anything could happen, every action counted. As Josei was cooking, a flash of light caught her eye. She turned around and saw a small picture on the wall, something she had almost forgotten amidst the daily chaos. It was a photo of her and her father, both smiling, immortalized in a moment of happiness. The image bore a handwritten caption, "Thank you for being a great father. With love, your daughter, Ippon Josei." A wave of nostalgia washed over her. Her father had been her biggest support, always encouraging her to keep going, even when the world seemed to be falling apart around her. That memory made her smile, but it also reminded her of the importance of being brave and helping others in crucial moments. With that thought in mind, Josei turned her attention back to cooking, letting the warmth of the memory wash over her. Although sometimes destiny is a bit strange, you don't know when things will happen. The newscast suddenly changes to report terrible news. Breaking news from Hosu, the suspected hero killer has struck again. This time, he has severely injured the pro-hero Ingenium. Chapter text. In the laboratory, the tests were rigorous. The shiny metal and advanced fibers that made up the armor gleamed in the dim light of the room. Every adjustment, every modification, was designed to withstand the weight of the coming battle. Meanwhile, the helmet, with its dark green visor, rested on the table, waiting to complete the ensemble. "You look good," I said, watching my partner as he finished putting on the Might Guardian, the suit he had designed specifically for my master, All Might. "Try moving your arms, tell me if it bothers you," I added, wanting to make sure everything was in perfect order. Following my instructions, my partner began to move his arms, stretching his shoulders and twisting his torso. Each movement flowed unhindered, just as I had planned. There should be no problem. I designed it to fit the user's body size regardless of their proportions. But seeing him inside it, feeling the suit come to life through his movements, was something else. The prototype was up to par. "Are you sure you want me to use your invention, Melissa?" Izuku asked, his tone filled with doubt. He seemed uncomfortable, almost as if he didn't feel worthy of wearing something that, in his mind, was either extremely expensive or reserved for a much more experienced hero, like my master, All Might. I smiled at him a little more warmly. "Yes, I mean it," I reaffirmed. I knew Izuku had that natural modesty, but I also knew he needed more self-confidence. He just nodded, though I could tell he still wasn't completely sure of my words. But the important thing was that at least he had agreed to wear the suit. "Back to the suit," I added, watching as Izuku explored each part of his new equipment. "I designed it to protect the user from all types of harm. Radiation, electricity, high and low temperatures, blunt force trauma, projectiles, sharp objects, and all types of impacts. I crossed my arms in satisfaction as I watched him move within the armor, his movements becoming more fluid and natural. You don't have to worry about the weight, I continued, leaning slightly towards him to more closely observe how the suit responded to his movements. I designed it to be as light as possible without sacrificing defense. You should feel like you're only carrying a little more weight than normal. Izuku nodded, still touching the material of the suit, as if he still couldn't believe how comfortable and efficient it felt. I'll admit it is light, he commented with a slight smile, appreciating the comfort of the design. The suit is implemented with energy shields that fully protect the user automatically, I explained, feeling proud of my creation. I wanted to make sure he understood all the features I had integrated. Let me give you an example, I continued, keeping his attention. If a villain with a fire quirk throws a flare at you, the suit will activate the shields, and you won't be affected by the burn damage. However, if the shields don't work because they weren't recharged earlier, the suit will still protect you, but you'll feel the damage this time. Though if it's an attack meant to burn you alive, with the suit, you could suffer first-degree burns. Izuku frowned, understanding the seriousness of what she was telling him. It's good protection, but that means I have to make sure to recharge the shields before every fight, right? He asked, his tone now more thoughtful. Exactly, I said, that's key. You don't want to be in a situation where you're short on resources. Plus, the suit's AI will warn you when the shields are low, so you'll have some leeway. He nodded again, this time with a more determined expression. Understood. In order to recharge the shields, I designed it so that they recharge when the suit is exposed to sunlight, I continued, explaining each detail with enthusiasm, although you can also use another external power source. However, I'm still looking for an efficient alternative, so finding one may be tricky. Izuku frowned upon hearing this, thoughtful, that makes sense. Sunlight is quite plentiful, but I won't always be in a place where I can access it. Exactly, I replied, that's why I'm working on other options. Maybe something you can carry with you, like a compact battery pack, for situations where you're indoors or in dark places. But overall, the suit should be more than capable of handling whatever challenges you face. I hope I don't have to try that too soon, Izuku joked, trying to lighten the mood, but his gaze showed genuine concern. I laughed a little too. Please put your helmet on, I asked, trying to keep my spirits up. I want you to hear the AI's voice. Izuku hesitated for a moment, but finally took the helmet and put it on. He adjusted the straps and looked at himself in the lab mirror, his figure reflected in the dark green visor, and now wow. He must be hearing the AI's voice from his helmet. With the helmet visor you can see your vitals and shield power levels. The suit's AI can also tell you your vitals, shield power levels, and if you take damage, the AI will tell you the exact damage, I explained, feeling excited about the technological advancement I had created. It's like having a teammate on your team, always looking out for you. I see, Izuku said, his tone becoming a little more enthusiastic. That sounds really useful. See, I told you it would be useful, I replied, pleased to see his reaction. I also implemented first aid into the smart suit. It will know when you are in great pain from your injuries, so it will administer morphine in extreme situations to help you focus on survival. Really, that sounds good to me, he replied, raising an eyebrow in interest. Yes, but there is a limit, I continued, making sure he understood the importance of this function. The morphine implemented in the suit can only be used on 3 occasions. I want you to reserve it for the most critical moments, when you really need to be at full combat capacity. Izuku nodded, his expression, behind the helmet, more serious now. I'll keep that in mind. I don't want to rely on it, but it's nice to know it's there if I need it. Exactly. The idea is that you can defend yourself and survive without being overwhelmed, I said, relieved that he was taking the suit's usefulness seriously, and also, remember that the AI will give you a warning before administering the morphine, so it won't be a surprise. That gives me some peace of mind, he admitted, as he began to walk around the lab, feeling the armor. I feel like I can do a lot with this. Obviously I'm not going to shoot you with all kinds of elements, I joked, trying to lighten the mood. I'm not a mad scientist, I replied with a smile, watching how he moved in the armor. "Sure," Izuku said, his tone more relaxed, though a hint of doubt still lingered in his gaze. "As a first test, we can check your mobility. Come on, join me outside," I suggested as I headed towards the lab door. Izuku nodded and followed me. As we stepped outside, the sunlight illuminated the suit, making the armor shine impressively, reflecting metallic glints that echoed the innovation it represented. "Ready for the test?" I asked, feeling the adrenaline building in the air. "Ready," he replied determinedly, his voice firm despite the uncertainty I could still feel. I could feel his confidence beginning to blossom, an encouraging sign that the suit was starting to sink in with his mind. To test your mobility and dexterity, combined with the protection offered by the suit, you need to face a strong, agile, and versatile opponent, I explained, as I took off and put away my glasses and tied my hair back into a ponytail. "And luckily for you, my schedule is open." "Are you going to fight me?" he asked, clearly surprised. "Oh, I forgot, we never had the chance to face each other in a friendly spar." "Yeah, and I'd also like to see if you're really skilled in combat like they say," I joked, remembering the impressive displays of his strength and technique during the sports festival. I knew Izuku had exceptional combat skill. Although he didn't have a quirk like mine, I'd always wanted to test it out in a fight. But he began to protest, his expression a mix of doubt and nervousness. "Don't worry if you hurt me," I assured him with a smile. "I'm stronger than you think." As I spoke, I activated One for All, and small bolts of energy crackled around my body, illuminating the surroundings with an electrifying glow. "Let's see if you can defend yourself well," I said while used One for All, 5%. "Okay," he finally replied, his gaze determined and full of resolve. "Go ahead and attack me whenever you want," I said, adopting a defensive stance as the energy of One for All flowed through me, ready to be released. Izuku took a second to focus. His breathing steadied as his muscles tensed, and in an instant, he lunged at me with surprising speed. His first attack was a quick, direct punch, packed with force. I could feel the power behind his blow before it even reached me. I dodged the attack with a nimble movement, leaning to the side and feeling the wind it generated as it passed so close. I smiled enthusiastically. "Not bad," I encouraged him, "but I know you can do better." Although his face was covered by his helmet, I could feel his concentration intensify as he adjusted his stance, determined to improve. His determination was palpable, and I knew he was ready to push beyond his own limits. Without a word, Izuku took a deep breath and moved forward again, this time with greater speed and precision in his movements. He launched himself at me with a series of strikes in rapid succession, each one faster and more calculated than the last. As I blocked and dodged them, I could tell he was adapting to my fighting style, learning with each movement, adjusting his approach and strategy as he went. Every time he dodged a punch or parried a kick, I could feel his mind racing, analyzing every response I gave him. With every step he took, his confidence grew, and his technique became more refined, more precise. It was clear that he wasn't just attacking on instinct, but was thinking strategically, quickly adapting to the dynamics of our fight. And seeing that his previous attacks weren't enough, Izuku threw a low kick, aiming for my legs, trying to catch me with an unexpected move. However, I had already seen it coming. Anticipating his action, I leapt gracefully, dodging the kick completely. In the air, my body spun with the precision and fluidity of a professional gymnast, and landing softly on the ground, I remained alert, not losing my composure. "Nice try, but you need more than that to surprise me," I said with a smile, my feet ready for any next attack. Izuku didn't respond. As always, his concentration was absolute. His breathing was controlled, and his movements, though quick and precise, showed no hurry or hesitation. Wasting no time after I landed, he immediately changed his strategy. Without words or obvious signals, his body simply moved, fluid and calculating. This time, his attack came from an unexpected angle. Instead of striking head-on, he slid sideways, throwing a flurry of quick, precise blows at my sides, looking to exploit any small opening in my defense. Even though his attacks were faster and harder to read, I still knew his patterns. Every blow he threw was dodged or blocked with fluid, calculated movements, using my agility to always stay one step ahead. However, I noticed something. His rhythm had changed. The attacks that used to be spaced out were now an unstoppable succession, each blow chained to the next with meticulous precision. This wasn't just brute force, it was a tactical mind working in real time, looking for the slightest opportunity to break through my defense. Izuku lunged at me again, this time with a combination of punches and kicks that forced me back. I knew I couldn't stay on the defensive alone if I wanted to outpace his growing skill. Taking advantage of a small gap between his attacks, I did a quick spin, sliding my foot back to gain distance and regain my stance. But before I could fully settle it, Izuku was already there, closing the gap with impressive speed. It's amazing how he doesn't slow down for a second, I thought as I blocked another blow aimed at my shoulder. Izuku didn't stop for a second, his focus relentless. I felt the impact of his blows even as I blocked them, and his constant pressure pushed me to always be on my toes. It was like he didn't give me time to fully recover, searching for any crack in my defense. I knew I had to keep my composure. I was facing someone whose combat skill had been honed exponentially. He's getting better with every move, I thought as I dodged another kick, this time faster and more precise. Izuku changed tactics again, throwing a low blow straight at my legs. This time, instead of dodging with a jump, I decided to anticipate it. I moved my leg back just enough to avoid the blow and countered with a quick twist of my body, throwing a kick towards his side. It was an unexpected move, but Izuku reacted with impressive dexterity, blocking my attack with his forearm and deflecting the impact. Not bad, I thought with an internal smile. It was clear that he was calculating my every move, adapting not only to my style, but also to my speed and rhythm. In an attempt to surprise him, I increased the intensity, activating One for All at 8%. My speed skyrocketed, and in the blink of an eye, I closed the distance between us, delivering a direct blow. Izuku barely had time to react, but he did. He raised his arm at the last second and deflected the attack, though the impact sent him back a few steps. I knew his eyes were shining with pure concentration. I knew he was facing something much stronger now, but he didn't back down. With a quick movement, Izuku spun on his axis and threw a low kick aimed at my legs again, but this time I saw it coming. I jumped nimbly, executing a flip in the air, landing with the precision of a professional gymnast right behind him. I didn't give him time to react and threw a kick, this time aiming for his back, but Izuku was already ready. He spun around, blocking my attack with both arms crossed, and then responded with a flurry of quick punches. Every blow he made was calculated, precise, and his intensity kept growing. It was clear that he wasn't fighting blindly, but was learning every second. My heart was pounding. It was impressive to see how far he had come. Finally, I took a step back, breathing deeper as I watched his posture remain firm. "You're doing incredibly well," I told him, even though I knew he wasn't looking for praise, just focused on getting better. I didn't take my eyes off him for a moment, but in my mind, a fleeting image appeared, the match I had with Midoriya at the sports festival. He was incredibly fast, almost impossible to read due to his quirk permeation, allowing him to phase through anything and appear where you least expected. Facing him was like fighting a shadow, unpredictable and challenging. But I learned a lot from that encounter. His speed and versatility were overwhelming, but I managed to stay on my feet. And now, facing Izuku, I noticed something similar. Even though Izuku didn't have Midoriya's quirk, his speed was reaching similar levels. Each of his movements was faster than the last, his mind working at full speed to calculate my actions and adapt to them. But one thing was clear, he had faced someone that fast before, and he knew how to deal with it. I focused, letting the memory of my fight with Midoriya guide my actions. The key wasn't just to keep up, but to anticipate. I couldn't just dodge and block forever. I knew that if I wanted to outmaneuver Izuku, I had to strike at the right moment, find that instant when his speed would leave him vulnerable, even if it was just for a split second. Izuku launched another attack, a quick strike aimed at my side. This time, instead of immediately dodging it, I met it with a firm defense, feeling the impact run through my arms. I didn't stop there, though. I used the force of the impact to my advantage, spinning on my heels and launching a counterattack towards his exposed side, all in one fluid motion. Izuku barely had time to react, stepping back to dodge by millimeters. He knew he was testing the limits of his speed, but my experience facing someone like Mirio gave me an advantage. It wasn't just about being fast, it was about being strategic. Remember that it's not just speed that makes you strong, I thought as I resumed my defensive stance, ready for the next assault. Izuku quickly recovered, his feet firmly planted on the ground as he adjusted his stance. There was no doubt that he had learned from our exchange, and his gaze reflected a mix of determination and focus. I gave him no time to think. With one agile movement, I advanced towards him, throwing out a series of quick strikes. Every blow I made was an attempt to force him back, to lose control, but Izuku moved with agility, dodging and blocking with a precision that showed he was absorbing every lesson from our fight. I threw a punch straight at his face, but at the last second, I decided to change direction, turning the movement into a side kick. The kick connected with his side, but his resistance, in addition to the suit, made it so that he didn't feel it too much. However, I could see that the kick made him stagger slightly. It was a small sign that the pressure was working. That was my chance. Come on, Izuku, I encouraged him, trying to motivate him while keeping up the pressure. Show me what you're capable of. With every move he made, I could see his mind working to find a way to counterattack. Izuku lunged at me again, this time with a low punch, followed by a high kick, a combination that, while fast, was predictable in its execution. Too obvious, I thought to myself as I ducked to dodge the punch and jumped to avoid the kick. Landing in a spin, I used the momentum to throw a knee at him. Izuku was barely able to react, blocking the blow with his forearm, but the impact forced him back. Well, that's it, I exclaimed, feeling the adrenaline pumping as each exchange grew more intense. Izuku was learning to adapt, but so was I. Every time he attacked, I adjusted my focus, trying to anticipate his next moves. The intensity of our fight continued to grow, and we were both pushing our limits. Strategies and moves flowed back and forth, and for a brief moment, I wondered who was challenging each other more, him challenging me, or me challenging him. Finally, after a quick exchange of movements, Izuku paused for a moment, taking a deep breath as his gaze focused back on me. It was clear he had picked up on my pattern. You're doing amazing, Izuku, I said with a smile, but also with sincerity, but I have to apologize, I haven't been fighting at my full power. He nodded, understanding the implication, I know. But don't worry about it, Melissa. I'm here to learn. His tone was calm, but there was a spark of excitement in his voice, as if each exchange was pushing him to do his best. Okay, but since we're in a test, let me give you a little demonstration of what I can really do, I said, as I prepared to escalate this point of the fight. Feeling the one-for-all energy flow through my body, I channeled it, letting the powerful essence flow through every fiber of my being. One for all, 50%. An explosion of vibrant energy invaded every corner of my being. I felt that overwhelming force envelop me, and with it, the confidence in my ability to handle it. If it had been a while ago, that day I received this quirk, this level of power could have made me break my bones or wear out my muscles, like so many times before. But no more. I had trained, I had learned, and above all, I had grown. Get ready, I warned him, letting my voice ring with the firmness of determination. Izuku, seeing me, instinctively went on guard. He knew that despite the protection his suit offered him, he was about to face a challenge that would push him to the limit. The tension in the air became palpable, a melting pot of excitement and anticipation. Before he could react, I launched myself at him. My body moved like lightning, each step powered by the electrifying energy of One for All. My first action was a direct attack, a punch that sought to test his defense. Izuku moved quickly, blocking my blow, but the force behind my attack resonated in his bones, making him stagger slightly. I wasted no time and followed up with a sequence of fluid movements, each strike with a power I could feel reverberating in the ground beneath our feet. That's it, Izuku, hold on, I shouted, feeling the adrenaline pulsing through my veins as I pushed him beyond his limits. His determination was palpable, and with each strike, he became more suited to my style. He ducked to dodge another attack, moving like a shadow, and in an instant, he responded with a series of quick jabs. Even though my speed had increased, his reaction was just as impressive. I dodged his blows with ease, moving with grace and precision. In a moment of inspiration, I decided it was time to make my final move. I focused, letting the energy of One for All flow through me, taking me at the speed of light. Delivering a powerful blow straight to Izuku's chest, he barely had time to react. He used his arms to block it, but the impact launched him away, crashing into a wall. The sound of the crash echoed through the air, and a moment of silence followed the crash. My heart stopped for a second, and excitement turned to concern. Deactivating One for All, I ran towards him, a mixture of fear and apprehension. "Ah! I'm sorry, Izuku," I exclaimed, feeling like I had crossed a line. I had gotten carried away by the excitement of the fight, forgetting that I was training, not fighting to the death. "Don't worry, I'm fine, the suit protected me," he said with a slight smile, trying to make light of the situation. His attitude was admirable, even in the heat of the moment. I'm not used to being hit with that much power. "Yeah, I got a little carried away," I admitted, feeling a slight blush rise to my cheeks as I recalled the intensity of the attack. "Your quirk, power, is really impressive," Izuku commented, as he adjusted his helmet, still recovering from the impact. "Ah, yes, it is," I replied, a little distracted. "That quirk, named Power, was one I invented in order to disguise One for All. Saying that it allows me to increase my speed and strength, making my movements seem more fluid and dynamic. Although all of that was due to One for All, so I wouldn't have to reveal that it was my true quirk. Better change the subject. What about the suit? What are the shield's power levels?" As I recall, while we were fighting, the levels dropped from 100% to 95%, and after your big hit, they will drop to 50%, Izuku explained, his tone filled with concentration. "I see, well, the suit is working perfectly," I said, trying not to sound guilty. "I'll recharge the shields in the lab so you can use them without problems." "Thank you," he replied simply, and I felt a little better knowing I could make up for the damage done. As we walked, the tension of combat began to dissipate, and the conversation flowed more relaxed. "The suit will be in my lab at all times, if you wish to use it for another occasion," I added, trying to sound as casual as possible. Izuku nodded gratefully. "I'll keep that in mind, thanks." I smiled, not just out of politeness, but because I genuinely liked smiling. Despite everything we faced in trials and training, finding those small moments of calm and camaraderie always reminded me that there was something beyond the constant fighting. Plus, it was comforting to know that I could help Izuku, someone who, like me, had started out quirkless, without a special ability, but had come this far thanks to his tireless effort and determination. "I'm glad it was useful to you," I added, unable to completely hide my satisfaction. Seeing that something I created with my own hands had given him an advantage in battle made me feel like I was somehow contributing to the world of heroes, despite not being on the front lines. We continued walking together for a few more minutes, enjoying that brief respite after training. Upon reaching the lab, I helped him carefully remove his suit. Izuku was always so meticulous, making sure not to damage a single component. I silently thanked him for that level of respect towards my work. "Thank you for everything, Melissa," he said, giving me a tired but sincere smile. "You really are amazing." "I'm just doing what I can," I replied excitedly. "Remember, the suit will be here when you need it. Don't hesitate to come back." Izuku nodded and said goodbye before leaving. I stared at the door for a moment, feeling a mix of pride and concern. I knew that even though he was a formidable hero, he always carried too much weight on his shoulders. Once alone, I set about repairing the suit. I began examining the damaged parts and components that needed adjustment, immersing myself in my work. For me, these solitary hours in the lab were always a refuge, a place where I could clear my mind and focus on what I did best. As I continued to work on the suit, a soft but authoritative voice echoed behind me, breaking me from my thoughts. "Don't you think you're trusting him too much?" I turned around quickly, surprised, and found myself face to face with a figure that shouldn't be there, as it was actually just an illusion. It was a woman, with dark hair and a determined look. I recognized her instantly, Nana Shimura, one of the previous wielders of One for All. "Is there a problem with that?" I asked, trying to remain calm. Nana's presence always seemed imposing to me, but I couldn't let her question throw me off. "You know that all those who accompany you will be targets of All for One," she replied with concern in her voice. Her gaze was intense, as if she was evaluating every word she said. "I know," I replied, letting out a sigh. I knew what she said was true. I had left my life on an island behind to come here to Japan. I left my father, my friends, everyone I knew to protect them, even my girlfriend. I broke her heart to keep her safe. All because that man, that monster everyone feared, was still alive, even though Uncle Toshinori had made sure he wasn't. I don't blame him. He didn't know at the time he entrusted me his power, One for All. Since I was little, I always wanted to be a heroine like him, hoping to make a difference in the world, to save others, to make everyone live happily. I am making a change, I have made progress, and I have grown as a heroine and as a person. But there will come a time when I will face that monster called All for One. And I know I'll be ready. "Nin, I already told you that you can call me Melissa," I interrupted her, trying to lighten the mood, although my voice sounded more tense than I intended. "Melissa, I understand that you like that boy named Midoriya, since you are both quirkless by birth, but you must not get too involved. Or else. Yes, All for One and everyone who follows him will kill everyone I care about." "I know it," I replied, more harshly than I intended. "That's why I have no friends, no girlfriend, no father, no one else to support me now, all because I want to protect them. I have Uncle Toshinori, but he will eventually succumb and can't go on anymore. And you don't count, because all you do is tell me what to do to prepare for a confrontation I didn't ask to be a part of." "Of course I know that." Nana was silent, her eyes filled with understanding, but her silence infuriated me even more. At that moment, all the pressure of being the bearer of One for All, of bearing the weight of destiny, hit me like an unstoppable wave. It was overwhelming, unfair, and I felt alone, even with the former bearers by my side. "I'm sorry, I lost the control," I muttered, looking down and feeling the heat rise to my cheeks. I was aware that I had let out more than I should have, exposing my fears and frustrations. "It's okay," Nana replied, her tone now soft and understanding. Her figure exuded a warmth that contrasted with her usual firmness. "Sometimes it's necessary to let off steam. I'm sorry it's so hard for you. Being the ninth wielder of One for All was never easy for any of us, but that doesn't mean you're alone." I looked up, surprised by her sincerity and the empathy reflected in her eyes. "Melissa," she continued, taking a step toward me, "you're right. You didn't ask for this burden. And while we can guide you, we're not the ones walking this path. It's you, and you alone, who has to face it. It's not fair, but you're not alone in this fight. You may not see us as real support, but we're here, even if it's just to listen." I felt something inside me soften. Her words didn't entirely ease the burden I carried, but it was comforting to know I wasn't as alone as I thought. "Thank you, Nana. Sometimes, I just want someone to understand me," I said with a broken voice, letting a small smile appear on my lips. "I understand," she replied with a sad but sincere smile, "and if it's any consolation, you're much better than Toshinori at using One for All. Please don't tell him." I let out a soft laugh. "Sure," I replied, feeling the tension dissipate slightly between us. The silence that followed was comfortable, filled with mutual understanding. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could face whatever came next, knowing that, in some way, I wasn't completely alone. Nana nodded slowly, as if she had sensed my inner change. "Remember, Melissa, strength lies not only in the power you possess, but in the will to keep going despite the difficulties." I nodded. "I'll keep that in mind. Thanks for being here." "Always," she replied before fading away smoothly, leaving behind a sense of peace. I was left alone in the lab, but this time the loneliness didn't weigh on me as much. I looked at the suit I was repairing and felt a renewed determination. In the end, I managed to help someone else like me. And although I had a purpose, and I knew the road would be difficult, I knew I could count on the legacy of those who had come before me. With a determined smile, I picked up my tools. It was time to move on. But as I did, something stopped me dead in my tracks. The suit was gone. The work table, once littered with parts and tools, was eerily empty. I felt my heart begin to beat faster, a chill running down my spine. I looked around, searching for some sign that everything I'd been doing, everything I'd been working on for hours, hadn't just been a memory. Nothing. The air became thick and heavy, as if the room was filled with unanswered questions. Where was the suit? Where had it all gone? A feeling of emptiness began to invade my chest. Just as panic began to take over, my eyes fixed on something. Only one thing broke the perfection of order: a note, folded carefully in the center of that place. With shaking hands, I reached out and took it, instantly recognizing the calligraphy that adorned the small piece of paper. Izuku. My heart stopped for a moment, as if time had decided to pause. What did this mean? The handwriting was familiar, warm, but it also carried with it an uneasiness that filled me with questions. I unfolded the note cautiously, my fingers feeling heavy, as if sensing that what I was about to read would change everything. With each fold I opened, uncertainty built up inside me. Why would he leave a note and not say where he had gone? My breathing became ragged, and a lump formed in my throat. Sorry for not saying goodbye, and for taking the suit. The words were etched into my mind like an echo, resonating loudly as I tried to process their meaning. Each line I read seemed to slip through my fingers, leaving a trail of confusion and unease. How could you do this? I didn't want you to try to stop me. My eyes widened, chill running through my body as my mind struggled to accept what I was reading. Had he left? Why? I staggered back, as if the impact of reality had hit me. It couldn't be true. There is someone I must face, alone. The feeling of loss intensified, and tears began to cloud my vision. Why didn't you tell me anything? The note slipped through my fingers, almost as if it was trying to escape the truth it contained. I felt the air escape from my lungs. No, 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 this couldn't be true. In case I don't come back, please take care of Eri. Every word felt like a blow to the chest. Melissa, calm down. Nana yelled at me, her voice cutting through the chaos in my mind. Her eyes were filled with worry, and for an instant, I realized that I had been unconsciously activating one for all due to my emotions. I know you're going to try to find him, but that boy made his decision. You can't interfere with it. It's true, I'm not his friend, I'm nobody to him, I replied, letting the sadness and frustration intertwine in my chest, tightening my heart with each word. I remembered the distance I felt between us, that invisible barrier that isolated me, despite my longing to get closer. I didn't say that. I don't know why it affects me so much. I don't know anything about Midoriya Izuku for it to hurt like this. I just thought, another person who is quirkless like me. It would be nice to be his friend, to have someone who understands me, who understands what it means to live in a world full of powers, where we feel out of place. At one point, I even saw him as a little brother. I must be crazy to think that. Melissa, but I'm nothing. Just a girl who's abandoned everyone she loves for a responsibility I didn't ask for, who longs for a connection with someone who could understand me, but it was never real. The tears began to well up, threatening to fall as despair took hold of me, feeling the emptiness inside me like a deafening echo. But he entrusted you to his sister, Nana insisted, her voice soft but firm, like a beacon in the midst of the storm raging in my mind. That means something. He chose you. Even if you two don't have a deep connection, the fact that he left that responsibility to you speaks to his trust in you. Nana's words resonated with me, challenging my insecurities, but the weight of my thoughts still weighed me down. The thought of not being enough, of not being able to live up to the expectations all might have had on me, consumed me. Why did he choose me? What do I have that can help him? I'm just a quirkless girl who was given a quirk because she wanted to protect others, but who knows nothing of the pain he's surely carried with him. Sometimes I feel like I'll never be able to understand what he's been through, what he's truly facing. Sadness was mixed with a spark of hope, and although I still felt lost, I knew I couldn't just sit back and do nothing. Fear ran through my veins, but in the midst of the storm of emotions, I realized that, somehow, Izuku had placed his trust in me. Why, Melissa, whatever you're going to say, I advise you to save it for when you find him, Nana interrupted me, her voice calm and firm, like an anchor in the midst of the storm that was raging through my mind. Yes, you're right, what are you going to do now? Nana asked, her gaze still fixed on me, as if she could see beyond my words, into the depths of my thoughts. I must find him, I replied, feeling determination begin to well up inside me like a glowing fire. I can't just stay here, feeling helpless. I need to know what's going on, I need to do something to help him. First, I must go see his sister, she must be wondering where her older brother is, Eri, I must go find her first. Without thinking, I left the lab, each step firm, as if the decision to move forward would give me the strength I so desperately needed. Good luck, it was the last thing I heard from Nana before she disappeared into the hallway, her support echoing in my mind like a mantra pushing me forward. Her confidence in me was a reminder that I was not alone in this fight, and it filled me with new energy. I just hope that Izuku, that my friend is okay. That plea became an echo in my mind, every step I took a silent prayer. Please take care of yourself, Izuku, I murmured, feeling the weight of worry settle on my chest. I need you to be okay. Anxiety and the desire to see him safe wove together into a thread of hope, driving me forward on this quest one couldn't put off. This was the last place where the notorious hero killer had carried out his final attack. The flickering lights of neon signs illuminated the worn sidewalks, casting elongated shadows that seemed to dance around me, mocking me, reminding me of what I am. The atmosphere was heavy with tension, as if the city itself breathed with the weight of its history, as if it knew what had happened here and judged me for my role in it. I stood on the rooftop of a small building, looking down upon the city of Hosu, the cold night wind blowing against my face, trying to tear me away from the dark thoughts that consumed me. But I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened here. The empty streets below still echoed with the sound of that battle. This was where Stain, the hero killer, had marked his last stand, and I had been in the middle of it all, lost, helpless. The lights flickered down below, but they failed to dispel the darkness I felt inside. There was no light that could reach the abyss I was in. I couldn't escape the whirlwind of thoughts that tormented me, each one crueler than the last. How did I get to this point? I'm the worst, I told myself silently, clenching my fists tightly. The physical pain could never compare to the weight of guilt I carried. I had left Melissa behind, who only wanted to help me. I had abandoned Eri, knowing she needed me, that she was counting on me to take care of her. I was all I had, and yet, I left her behind. But I trusted Melissa, she was strong, always smiling, always willing to help others. Even someone as broken, as useless, as me. How could I leave her? I would have liked to say goodbye, to tell her what I really thought before running off into this chaos. But I couldn't afford those connections anymore. I didn't have time to grieve or to hold on to the few rays of light that still remained in my life. I don't deserve them. I don't deserve a normal life. My eyes drifted to the streets of Hosu, where everything had begun to crumble. This was the last place Stain had struck, where heroes had fallen beneath his razor-sharp blade, and where I, blinded by my own weakness, had followed him without question. What was the plan? Find him, stop him, and kill him. This time I won't hesitate. The last time I saw him, it was a disaster, a horror I can't erase from my mind. We argued. For Stain, it was all a matter of distorted justice, of purging a rotten and false system. And I, like a fool, tried to understand him, to justify him, thinking that his words hid some truth. He had trained me, shown me how to stop being weak, how to be useful. I admired him, followed him. He was my teacher. A killer, yes, but was my sensei. Until I realized the truth. Though I never killed anyone with my own hands, I was complicit in every death he caused. I gave him my ideas, my intelligence, my knowledge of heroes. I gave him the tools to destroy them. And he did. I just watched from the shadows, allowing it all, convincing myself that I had a purpose, that maybe I was serving something bigger. I had the opportunity to stop him, to kill him when I had the advantage. But I hesitated, and I failed. And when he knew, the fury in his eyes was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. That rage I once admired, that I believed was a passion for an ideal, was now directed at me. He attacked me with a cruelty I never imagined he could feel for me. He drove 2 swords into my shoulders, the same ones I now carry on my back as a perpetual reminder of what I have allowed. Then, he paralyzed me with his quirk, leaving me immobile, vulnerable. He could have easily killed me, it would have been an act of mercy for a traitor like me. But he didn't. Instead, he left me hanging on the wall, like a pathetic trophy. A constant reminder of my failure, of my inability to act when it mattered most. The worst part of it all is that I deserve it. What happened next, what followed that day, is my fault. Everything Stain did, every life he took, every hero who fell or was crippled, is a weight I must bear. It is my fault. I see those families in my mind, mourning their loved ones. Friends, colleagues, all of them broken by my inaction. Because I didn't have the courage to stop him. Because I let myself be blinded by a broken cause. I failed them all. I laugh, though there's nothing funny about it. It's a bitter, empty laugh. A normal life. Me, to think that I once dreamed of being a hero, of helping people, of living a simple life, maybe even having friends, a family, now it just seems like a cruel joke. I have no future, not anymore. After this, when it's all over, if I'm lucky, I'll die. If not, I'll turn myself in. I'll spend the rest of my days in a cell, away from the world. Where I belong. Melissa will take care of Eri. She's always been better than I'll ever be. If they ever try to find me, I'll say horrible things to them, I'll push them away. They don't deserve to be around someone like me. They don't deserve a killer. Suddenly, an explosion interrupts my thoughts, shaking me out of the darkness I was sinking into. What the hell was that? The roar of fire and smoke rises in the distance. I can see the orange glow, the flames reflecting off the windows of nearby buildings. This isn't related to Stain. It's not why I came here. But I look at the chaos that has broken out. Innocent people are in danger. People I can save. If I just stand here, doing nothing, won't that be another failure on my shoulders? My mind screams, twisting in conflict. Stain is my target. Stopping him is the only thing that matters. But I can't let more people die because of my inaction. I can't allow any more blood to stain my hands. Damn it. I mutter, feeling my feet already start to move before my mind has even made up its mind. The chaos in the distance calls to me, as if the flames were a distant echo of my own despair. As I look out at the disaster, the cold night wind still hits my face, but I feel nothing but the weight of my thoughts. I adjust the helmet of my protective suit, checking the tools I carry with me. Each small adjustment seems more mechanical than human, as if it were not me who was preparing to save lives, but an automaton, an empty reflection of what I once was. I don't know if this will redeem anything. I don't know if saving someone will change anything inside me, if it will ease this burden I feel crushing my chest. What's the point of saving someone when I was complicit in so many deaths? When could I have stopped Stain and I didn't? It's like trying to put out a fire with a single drop of water. Futile, insignificant, but still, it's the least I can do. For now. Breaking news. Hosu City is under attack by strange creatures. If anyone from Hosu sees this, please evacuate immediately. The news screen flickered with chaotic images of the city of Hosu in chaos. Towering, deformed creatures known as Nomus rampaged through the streets, destroying buildings, vehicles and everything in their path. Reporters, trying to remain calm as they reported, recounted scenes of impending destruction as sirens blared across the city. The heroes who had been deployed to Hosu seemed overwhelmed by the situation. Cameras captured brief clashes where heroes tried to hold back the beasts, desperately fighting to save civilians. However, the scale of the attack exceeded any expectations. Explosions and fire lit up the night sky over Hosu, painting an apocalyptic picture. The creatures advanced relentlessly, destroying everything in their path. Civilians, caught in the chaos, ran in all directions, trying to find a way out while the heroes struggled to contain the disaster. In the midst of all this, the newscast voice continued, firm but desperate. "We repeat, the city of Hosu is under attack. If anyone from Hosu sees this, evacuate immediately. Stay safe and follow the directions of the heroes in the area." The gravity of the situation was clear. Hosu was the epicenter of a hellish battle, and the destruction brought by these creatures made it clear that the night was only just beginning. To be continued. I hope you enjoyed this story. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.